Good evening, friends, and shalom. Blessings to you all in the name of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Welcome to this episode of Un-Apologetics, the show where we are unapologetic about apologetics, and I am your host, CJ Cox. We are having our Not-so-Sabbath night open mic tonight. The reason we decided not to do this on Friday night like usual is because I just got done with a debate over on Standing for Truth's channel, and we decided to have an after show. If you are joining us from that debate, or if you just want to come in and join the conversation, link is pinned in the live chat. Please do come in if you want to. We certainly appreciate all of you. And I want to go ahead and acknowledge some people we have in the live chat currently. We got iQuicks, Chris Lucas, Thomas Ultion. I hope I said that correctly. Michael Smith is here. Cheryl, it looks like, is here with us. Let's see who else we got. Truth Defenders is here. Wank Jelic, I know what the first one is supposed to be, but nonetheless, is here. Kelvy Quayo, also here. Shalom to you all. Thank you very much for being here, and I appreciate you. If you are here, please remember to like and share that. This video, excuse me. Please remember to subscribe to the channel if you have not done so. Hit that bell to get notified of every time that we go live. Also, if you'd like to follow us on various social media platforms, you can follow us on Gab, Parler, Facebook, Minds, or Twitter at The Synagogue. Also, if you would like to give to us financially, you can do so either through the Patreon or the PayPal. Only do so if you think the apologetics we're providing is solid and providing clarity in the massive glut of constant podcasting that is YouTube. Also, a couple other people just joined us. Mishael23S, thank you for joining us. Kevin's Biblical Discussion, thank you for joining us. Red Pill of the Bible, thank you for joining us as well. And again, friends, we do have a link pinned there in the live chat. So if you would like to join, certainly do appreciate anybody who does so. We got some very kind words from a couple of you. Cheryl says, great debate. Appreciate you, sister. Truth Defender says, well done tonight. Appreciate that as well. Wank Jelic says, nice pick. Thank you very much. I actually designed this logo myself, so I'm glad that you like it. Also, Alex says that I pronounced it fine. I appreciate that. Hungarian, super cool. Are you here from Hungary, or are you actually in the United States, but just of Hungarian descent? Let me know in the live chat. I'd certainly be interested in figuring that out. Puff puff pass, CJ. That's how it goes. That's funny. Let's see. Yes, I was letting my dogs out there. iQuicks, I appreciate. Or excuse me, not iQuicks. It looks like Speed Reader's the one who said that initially, but nonetheless. Tomas also says, or Tomas, excuse me, it was a good job. Thank you. Appreciate you very much. Chris Lucas also supportive. Appreciate you guys all tremendously. You guys are the main reason. The main reason, of course, is God, but you guys are definitely, people we appreciate here. And Tomas says, I am in Canada, Alberta. That's cool. A large portion of my family is from Alberta, actually. Calgary, right outside the Calgary region, but nonetheless, that's super cool. I've never personally been, but my grandfather's father was born and raised in Calgary. So that'd be my great-grandfather, I guess. Nevertheless, appreciate seeing you here. Pak Wu is also here, or Pak Yu, excuse me. And all right, let's get right into some of the discussion here today. Man, we have already hit 20. That's awesome. Frost and News Unit are also both here as well. Appreciate you guys tremendously. I appreciate this comment especially because it's always harder to admit that somebody did well if they're on the opposite side of you. So I appreciate that Frost says I did well, even though he disagrees with me here. And also, King's Table has joined us as well. I didn't know you were from Canada, King's Table. That's cool. Man, there's a lot of Canadians in the YouTube sphere, which makes sense because we all speak the same language and have a really similar culture. But nevertheless, we have been joined also by our first guest, long time no see, Nicholas Proclaimer of Messiah. Shalom, brother.
Shalom.
Very good.
I thought everyone you were mentioning, I thought they were backstage, but
Oh no, they're all here in the live chat. Paul T also here in the live chat. Shalom, and thank you very much for being here. Well, since we have our first person here, let's go ahead and start the panel discussions. Brother Nick, did you see the debate, and also what were your thoughts, comments, concerns, critiques, anything like that? And go ahead, floor is yours.
Yeah, I listened to most of the debate from almost the beginning until I think you guys were discussing whether you were going to do the Q&A or do things in a different order or something. Oh, yeah, so just before the Q&A, I listened to your guys' outros, and then I decided to listen to something else, and I'm going to finish it later. So sorry for the long explanation. Point is that, yes, I listened to the debate. And I have some key things that I would like to mention.
Absolutely, and I appreciate you there. Real quickly, just oh, stop it, girl. What were some of the just brief thoughts you had before we get into more of the detail?
Well, I think my thoughts are very different because you guys almost segmented it up into like what was it, 4 different sections?
Yeah, we
And
looked at 4 verses in particular and kind of dedicated 15 minutes to each.
That I have a different opinion on, different sections.
For sure. We'll save some of that then for when we get more in the open room then, because that sounds like it'll be a little bit more in depth. Kevin's Biblical Discussions has joined us. Shalom, and thank you for being here, brother. Criticisms, comments, critiques, concerns, what'd you think of the debate, and any other comments you might have. Floor is yours. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, bro. CJ, always a pleasure. I think you did a really good job in the debate. The part that bothered me the most was actually at the end during the questions and answers. When I asked the question, did the church have the inspired words of God before 1611? And your interlocutor said no. That was very, very troubling to me, because the church had the word of God the whole time. So I think that that's where the position becomes dangerous, in my opinion. But yeah, overall, I thought you did a pretty good job showing the proper translation, how King James has it as stones in the book of Job. There's a couple other things got into, like churches. I've heard what's his name, Sentinel Apologetics bring that up before, even though I tend to disagree with him a lot, like actually borderline heretic in my opinion. But he's right. Like churches didn't exist back then. They had synagogues. So how could it have been churches? That can't be the proper translation. But yeah, I'm not going to hog the floor. I think you did well, CJ, and I did have a few problems. And also good to see you, Nicholas.
Good to see you, Kevin. Hello.
I was on mute there. Sorry about that.
Oh, good.
And I appreciate that tremendously. I also have that same issue with the KJV only position, because you almost have to take that position, is the thing. Like, you can't be consistently KJV only unless you affirm that the Bibles before the KJV were inerrant, because really there is no Bible version that agrees perfectly with the King James Version. Whether it's Geneva, Tyndale, Wycliffe, New King James, Tanakh, Jewish Tanakh version, 1917, Douay-Rheims, so on and so forth. You can just go on, right? There is no Bible version that agrees with the King James Version perfectly, and so you almost don't have a choice. You either have to concede that you're not a KJV onlyist, or you have to bite the bullet and say, yeah, there was no inerrant Bible before 1611. And on top of the fact that, there's theological issues as far as, what we mean by inerrancy and stuff like that. I also think there's just kind of a logical error too. Is like, if there was no inerrant translation before the KJV, then how'd you get the KJV? Right? Were they like inspired or something? Is this like the book of the 67 elders who had translated? And are they like akin to prophets or something like that? It's a very problematic position, I think.
It's a grounding problem.
Exactly, right? It's 100% a grounding problem. And it's one of the problems, in my opinion, that exposes the whole thing, especially when they say, he'll ask, do you believe there is a completely inerrant version today? And usually I'll say no. I'm kind of coming around on the NKJV because the NKJV corrects most of the errors that I believe exist in the KJV. But nevertheless, the answer I think is found in the manuscript tradition and the collection of translations that we have, such that we have the ability to have an inerrant Bible, right? But they'll say, so you don't think there's a single one? It's like, well, if you're going to say that even before, like back in the 200s and 300s, there wasn't an inerrant version, then I don't understand why it's a problem for me to not have an inerrant version in 2022. And again, it's not even necessarily going to be reflective of my views per se, because I'm kind of coming around on that NKJV. But
Well, I think we would need to know Greek a whole lot better to assess if there is a Greek version out there that and we have to know the manuscript evidence better. Even though I subscribe to the KJV style, the Textus Receptus style of scholarship, which is that because James White has the exact same problem as Kinney. Is that his name, Mr. Kinney or Dr. Kinney? I don't know.
That is exactly right. Will Kinney. No doctor though. He's just Mr.
Or Will Kinney will do. Okay. And then so James White has the exact same problem because he's saying that between all the manuscripts, everything is preserved so that everything is there somewhere, which is very important. But then he doesn't necessarily have that having gone on through all of church history. See, they jump back to the beginning and rebuild it rather than saying, well, as the church handed it down, somewhere within what was handed down, when they got to the 1500s, in all that stuff, there was a perfect translation to be assessed and discovered potentially. And James White says that's the case now, but he doesn't say, as far as I know, his position, the way they reconstruct from old manuscripts, oldest is always best, then everything in between is not as good. But we have a guarantee that it was handed down the entire time in between. So therefore, everything in between should be really good. I also think it goes one step. There. What? Did you say I cut out?
Yeah, it's coming back now, though. I can hear you good now.
I heard him fine the whole time.
Okay, that might have been just me then.
Okay, so that time it was CJ. Okay, thanks for the clarity, Kevin. So, yeah, so then it goes one step further, in my opinion, and that's that also the ones that lasted might have been like semi-rejects that weren't used very often or were just put in storage because, they weren't the ones that people wanted to use. And the ones that were really useful, they would have been the source of what was handed down, but they also would have been destroyed because they would have been really useful. And so the idea that oldest is best, I think, is actually just really naive and incorrect if we just actually assess the reality of it.
Yeah, and I actually would agree with that. And this is one of the reasons why I personally subscribe to what our friend Jonathan Sheffield has called the ecclesiastical text, which is basically saying, we have the Syriac, the Coptic, the Latin, the Greek, so on, all these different translations. And there's a reason that tradition has passed on these translations over and against others, right? And it's because the scholars closest to, all of who are believers, by the way, closest to the originals believed that this was what is correct, right? So, like, for example, with the Pericope Adulterae, you'll find it in the Peshitta and in the Vulgate, obviously in your King James. And there's a reason for that. It's not necessarily because it's found in the oldest extant manuscripts, although I think if we actually had physical copies of the oldest, it would be there. But it's because the church at the time, having their own scholars and leaders and righteous men of God, did their due diligence to figure out whether or not this was actually the original autographs from the disciples, and this is what they came up with. And now all these texts coming from churches which weren't related to each other have the same Bible. And in my opinion, I think it relies on the manuscript tradition like James White does, but not so exclusively so as to say stuff like Father forgive them or the pericope adulterae or stuff like that aren't actually original, which I totally think that they are.
Yeah, and more to the point, it uses the manuscript tradition, but with a different set of presuppositions, which I think are more Christian and less secular.
Right. Exactly. And they have more of a faith not only in our brothers from the past, but also in the Holy Spirit's ability to preserve his own word. And by the way, I fully believe that James White is a believer, but on this particular issue, I think he's in tremendous error, which is unfortunate because he has a big of enough platform that it can create problems. Really quickly, I want to say to some of the others here, Peter W. has joined us. Shalom, thank you for being here. Michelle Sherry KJV is here. Shalom, and thank you for being here. Laura Hagen, awesome. I have not seen you in forever. Shalom, sister. Thank you for being here. I have been meaning to get back to you for like a month and haven't done so. And it is because I'm absolutely terrible. So I hope you'll, accept my sincerest repentance on that. But nevertheless,
Yeah,
I appreciate you being here.
I want to cut in and say hello to Peter and Laura real quick as well. It's been quite a while with you guys. And I guess it's been a while with everybody. I haven't been around as much because of how I've been focusing on work for income as well as the Greek Access Bible Project. But as well as, not saying that the only thing I've been doing is being productive, but from my perspective, it's been more a while with those.
Quick, Alex, can you? Here, I'm gonna have to. There you go. No. So I got you muted real quick, Alex. Exit out of your YouTube because we're getting a feedback from you.
That sounded like StreamYard feedback.
Yeah,
I think
appreciate you being here, but nonetheless, you'll have to exit out of the YouTube just real quick. Go ahead, Nick, and finish your thought.
Oh, I finished. I was just saying hi to them and hi to everybody. But yeah.
Hey, CJ, I wanted to get your opinion on the Latin Vulgate. What do you think of that? Do you think it's like reliable?
Oh, definitely. I think Jerome was a fantastic scholar and a fantastic translator. I think he was a good man of God. And I think that, he have certain things that were, we lost Alex there. Did he have certain things that were problematic? Well, everybody does, right? In his case, the church in Rome kind of forced his hand in regards to translating the Apocrypha, and he bowed to their wishes. I don't think he should have, but he made sure everybody knew it was under protest. But nevertheless, I really like Jerome, and I really like the Latin Vulgate translation. I think that it's one of the texts that demonstrates for us preservation of pericope adulterae, 1 John 5:7, stuff like that. Texts which a lot of people think shouldn't be there. But yeah, I think it's a perfectly good translation. Alex, first off, Echo's gone, so thank you for that. Secondly, Shalom, thank you for being here.
Yeah, Shabbat Shalom. Thank you.
Absolutely. Go ahead and give us some of your thoughts, man. What were any critiques or criticisms that you have, or any thoughts that you might have? And thanks for joining.
Well, it was pretty good to watch this debate again. More familiar with the words that matter, the Bible text, especially, and I think it was still better than the other debate. Well, a lot of thoughts actually. I was making notes and find Bible verses and study the ones that is most important on my view. Yeah, basically in general, this is my thoughts for now.
Absolutely, and I appreciate you giving those thoughts here. And we'll have everything opened up here in just a moment. Real briefly before we do, I want to go ahead and address a couple things said here in the live chat. first thing, iQuix made an excellent point that was just a total blunder on my part. He brought up Romans 2:22, which uses another verb form. I can't believe I forgot to do this. This is actually, it's a little bit malfeasance on my part, which uses another verb form of hierosilus. It's hierosulio, and it's translated in Romans 2:22 in the KJV as "dost thou commit sacrilege?" And I can't believe that I missed that. That was absurd on my part. Oh man, I was, as soon as he brought that up in my live chat, I was kicking myself. Like, come on, Jay, because I knew that too, and that's a complete killer on Acts 19:37. And the funny thing about it is, in my last debate with Will Kinney, it was brought to my attention by somebody in the audience. I didn't know it before then. And so I was thinking to myself in this debate, yeah, this is going to be a really good point since we're talking about Acts 19:37 again. And then I dropped the ball hardcore.
Wait, CJ, can you explain how does that help your position? I'm sorry, you lost me there.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
I
so-
mean, I'll give you the refutation, CJ, because it's not necessarily used uniformly. So it was correctly translated sacrilege in one case, and then correctly translated robbers of churches in the other case. That would be Will Kinney's answer. And, you know, since he won't acknowledge any shortcomings in the KJV, he would have to acknowledge that he misspoke before. Or he would probably just say things and try to smooth over it, actually.
Well, and real briefly to Kevin's question. So there's three potential translations of hierosilus in Acts 19:37. There's church robbers, which really is more accurate than robbers of churches. Like we discussed in the debate, it's a plural noun. So it's not like saying there's multiple fires, it's saying there's multiple firemen. Or in this case, it's not saying there's multiple churches/temples, it's saying there's multiple robbers of the church/temple.
Okay, may I chime in? I've studied the word and I've studied the Greek very carefully, and yeah, CJ is correct on this point. I've studied this point before.
And I appreciate that. Thank you.
Or I should say I've tested it. Like, I had the
Right.
question and I tested it carefully.
Yeah, and so it's either, and I appreciate that, by the way, because that's I know you study the Greek more than I
Second
do.
witness.
Exactly. But so it's church robbers, temple robbers, or sacrilegious, and those are the three potential translations that people give. Now, sacrilegious and temple robbers are the ones that I think would better work. I think church robbers is completely untenable. Out of those two, though, you still obviously have to make a choice. Which one is it? Is it temple plunderers or sacrilegious? I think it literally means temple plunderers, but that the meaning of the phrase is sacrilegious. Kind of like how we'll use phrases, we'll put together two different words, like arsenokoitos is a great example, actually, which is the Greek word for homosexual. It literally means man betters, but you don't translate it as man betters, but it's taking the word for bed and the word for man and putting it together.
Because a lot of people say, we should use the word sodomite or whatever, but I think that's deliberately inflammatory because you're referring to a city that was destroyed. But I use man better and woman better. Like, that's legitimately, those are the words I use. So I guess.
Yeah, and that's not wrong in the sense that it's literal, but the word that we would probably better translate it as is homosexual. Because it's
But
more
the way God said it was man better, so I disagree. I think man better is a much better translation.
Well, you see, that's actually the point that I'm getting at here with this hierosilus, though, right? Is like you're taking the two words which have their literal meanings, and then when you put them together, the literal it's not that the literal usage of the words is wrong. It's that the words are trying to describe a specific thing that is exemplified by the literal translation of the two words, right? And so here, when you have hiero, it's sacred things, and then silus is plunderer. So, or I steal is actually the more proper translation. It's more in the first person. So it's like hierosilus would be plunderer of sacred things, and it's either that literally, or it would be something more akin to sacrilegious, using the phrase to plunder sacred things as sort of a sort of a what would you call that? There's a word that I'm trying to use to describe it, but nevertheless, to describe this particular word, right? So that's where the dispute there comes in. But then when you go to Romans 2:22, it uses another verb form of that word, hierosulio, and hierosulio is translated in the King James Version as commit sacrilege. In other versions, it'll variously be translated as do you rob temples, because again, you still have that problem of is it sacrilege or is it temple plunderer. So the reason that helps the case for the person who's saying Acts 19:37 is translated incorrectly is because the KJV only translators recognize the original definition or the more likely definition when they translated Romans 2:22, and whereas other Bibles are consistent in their usage of temple plunderer / sacrilegious, the King James is not. It'll say church robbers in one area, and then it'll say sacrilegious in this area, which of course is something that to an extent is to be expected. They're all men. They're all subject to error just as we are, but nevertheless, so that's why the case would be helped for the non-KJV only position, is because you're demonstrating an inconsistency, and that the original KJV translators recognized that hierosulio was more likely to refer to either sacrilege or to temple plundering. I think that church plundering is completely untenable. Either of those other two are tenable, but church plundering I think doesn't make any sense.
Well, I'd like to chime in because etymology is the etymology would be I don't know exactly what the word means, but it looks like it would be like sanctuary plunderer, because it looks like the etymology is referring to its sanctimoniousness, so it would be the word sanctuary. So it'd be sanctuary plunderer would be the etymology, and the meaning could easily be, I'm sure it could be used literally if it was, but it could easily be much more common that it's used to refer to sacrilegious. And then I found where I could study deeper into it, but I'd have to do that at another time and get back to you. But if it's like an adjective, it could even be if it's robbing sanctimoniousness, then that might be more related to sacrilege. So it might be more of an adjective than a noun, like robbing that which is sanctimonious or robbing set apartness. But then again, it's not the word hagia, so it's not simply the word set apart. And so I have to compare the synonyms and stuff to see what all the nuances are, but it is an answerable question. I just don't have the answer yet.
Yeah, and well, actually, if anybody else has comments real quick, go ahead, because I was going to answer another question from the live chat. So Kevin or Alex, if you have any other comments, go ahead.
Oh, CJ, is the word a robber there in the Greek?
So it's not robber, it's I steal. So it's the Greek word. It's a compound word, and the words it combines are hieros and sulos, or suleao, excuse me. Suleao, and I'm actually going to pull it up here so I can quote it directly, is I rob, plunder, or strip. So it's not like stealer or robber, but it's I rob or I steal. And it's kind of combining the word there to describe. So these people are hierosilus, or sacred space I steal, variously translated stealing for those who steal from sacred places or temples or stuff like that. Or also, like I said, some people translate it as sacrilegious.
Okay. On my first time, I was trying to study this verse. I look it to my Bible in my language, in Portuguese, and I wasn't even sure which chapter. So I read the chapter 19 and say, oh, it's not this one. Which is the chapter? Because I couldn't find the word robber and churches or temple in the verse in my language. And then I go to English, and then I see the word robbers and temple and churches. Then later I found other versions in my language using these words. But I guess I think This verse, translate this as temple or churches, definitely is a terrible translation. And I think this is the one of the worst texts for King James onlyness to address. And for me, the clue, and for example, if you read the 2000 Jubilee version, it says sacrilege, nor blasphemers of your godless goddess. But the key for understanding here is not talking about robber or robbering or stealing or something. Well, maybe, of course, in a case, what I can see here, for example, is if someone steals something from a temple, it will be stealing, but also you're gonna be a sacrilege because you're gonna be something against something sacred. But for me, the key to understand here is on verse 25 and 26. If you go back to these verses, 25 and 26, whom he called together with the workmen of like occupations, and say, sirs, yes, know that by this gain we have our wealth. Then verse 26, moreover, ye see and hear that not alone Ephesus, but almost throughout all Asia, this Paul has persuaded and turned away many people, saying, here's the point. What did Paul say? Paul was saying that they were not gods. So the craft, the idols, the image, Paul said, these are not gods. So here, this was the problem, which are made with hands. So these things made with hands are not gods. So Paul wasn't stealing anything. Paul was despising these idols. So verse 27, so that not only these our craft is in danger to be set it enough, but also that the temple of the great goddess Diana should be despised. So Paul despised the idols, the image made by hand, saying these are not God. So I guess these verses are key to understand the verse 37.
Yeah, it's not referring to churches in context because there's so much focus on whether or not he is sacrilегing specifically a temple. That is specifically the context.
Yeah, or even as Alex is pointing out, even stealing, right? It's not even necessarily referencing stealing. That word for steal is there, but it seems like sacrilegious is the proper translation.
Well, it could be thought of as vandalizing. So it's saying like he didn't do any damage to it, but then it says he didn't blaspheme her, at least in the English, and it seems like that's not really true because he said she doesn't exist. And I mean, I think relative to their belief system, that would be blasphemy, right?
Yeah, I guess it kind of. So,
but it doesn't seem like the guy was necessarily there. He comes out as like the more mature person to calm down what is an immature way of handling the disagreement, you know? If you read what he's saying, he's like, you shouldn't, you know, you're like, everyone knows that we worship Diana here, so you shouldn't like behave like this over it, is sort of a summary of what he says when he comes out.
Yeah, it looks like it doesn't match. Yeah, it doesn't match. What the guy said on verse 27 doesn't match with what Paul did, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, because he's not infallible. It's scripture that's infallible.
Right.
Yeah. What the guy said doesn't matter.
Well, and the other thing too is,
Well,
you
it
know,
probably has typologic. Oh, sorry, it probably has typological significance, but that would be for another time to study that.
yeah, and the other thing too I would point out here is that, you know, when it comes to, well, actually, before I get to that, I want to say there is a sense in which Paul isn't blaspheming the false deities. And the first time I had ever heard this explained to me was via Doug Wilson, but I have since heard the same idea repeated from John Piper and also from James White. And it's like there's two different ways to blaspheme, right? And one of the ways is kind of sinful regardless of who you're talking about, and another one of the ways is only sinful if you're talking about the Most High. So the first way is just disparaging for the sake of disparaging, right? Like if I started coming up here and saying stuff about how like Allah does all these, you know, horrible things to children or stuff like that.
Well, like if an atheist tells us they don't think Christ is God, or that God even exists, that's different than if they're like purposely saying offensive things.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. That's 100% right. And so it's like both are blasphemy in a sense, but one of them they're expressing I don't want to say, I guess, honest, but in a way, genuine belief, like they're trying to have conversation. And the other one, they're just mocking. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And Paul doesn't seem to be a mocker.
Yeah, that's right. I agree. And if you think about it, well, if maybe this one that is saying this on verse 37, already believing on what Paul's preached, and since they are not God, so wasn't a blasphemy because actually they aren't God. Diana wasn't God.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Well, reading the account, I think it comes across more that Paul just wasn't being offensive, and the word blasphemy was being used in that way. That's my opinion. Is CJ's explanation.
Hey, real quick, Alex, before we move off of this, we'll come back to it eventually. Sure. But before we move off of this, I'm curious, what is the Portuguese usually use in verse 1937 for temple plunderers? What is it? What's the word?
Sacrilege. Sacrilege. Almost every translation.
It's funny because that is the one that I am more convinced of as well. So I think sounds like the Portuguese translators are also more convinced of that.
Yeah, definitely. Not church at all. On that time, look, today we call buildings locales of congregation. We call these buildings church, but in that time they didn't. And
yeah, the word church was a group of people. It wasn't a building, so.
Exactly.
I mean, I guess you could say you're not robbing the group of people, and a church is a sacred group of people, but that's not the context in the chapter. It's just not.
Yeah, it's not at all. It's not about the Christians. It's about the pagan people that were worried about and concerned.
Yeah, and this is one of the reasons I brought up. You know, in the Bible, whenever you see the word church, it's always, from the Greek at least, it's always the word ecclesia. And the reason it's always ecclesia is because it's not a physical place; it's a group of people. And so when you go there to go to Silos, you know, it doesn't make sense to say robbing the sacred spaces, because in the way that we have churches today, they didn't have those sacred spaces. They just simply had gatherings or ecclesias. And you know, part of that, of course, has to do with persecution, because unfortunately, you couldn't put a sign on your door and say, "Hey, welcome to King James or King Jesus Tabernacle," or something like that, right? They'd burn it down and kill your pastor and all that other kind of stuff. But you know, today, obviously, we have the luxury of being able to do these kinds of things in Western countries, at least, thank God. But you know, so that makes it all the more important that if this word were to say church robbers, that it would have to be that word ecclesia, some like ecclesiasilus or something like that. I don't know exactly how you would compound it, but nevertheless.
Yeah, yeah. Since the word ecclesia is not there,
Exactly.
so doesn't make sense at all to translate as church. Yeah.
So real quickly, we'll return to this in the rest of the debate, but I also wanted to answer another couple questions from the live chat, just in case these people don't end up joining us. So Tomas asked again about if I could expand a little bit on Isaiah 45:7, because he asked a question in the live chat of the debate. Is the King James Version using the word evil here incorrect? And I said, no, I don't think that is an error. So to give you some, I don't know if you're still here, Thomas, but to give you some extra thoughts on that, Isaiah 45:7, the underlying Hebrew word is the word ra'ah, right? And ra'ah is a word which is generally translated as evil, but can also be translated as calamity or badness, stuff like that. But it's not in any way incorrect to say that the word is translated as evil. And in fact, if we look at some of the other usages of the word, we'll see, like, for example, there is the tree of knowledge of good and evil, right? And actually, I think I might have been pronouncing it wrong. Did I say ra'ah? I think it's ro'ah. Anyways, I'll have to look that up. I can't remember if it's ra'ah or ro'ah, but regardless, the point is, we see the translation of this word in, tree of knowledge of good and evil. It's the tree of Ra, and that's the evil, and then of course the good there is, I think, Tov is the one used there. Tov isn't the only word they have for good, but I'm pretty sure it's the one that's used in Genesis 3. So what you have going on here, right, is a clear description of bad things. And I just pulled it up here to make sure it is Tov and Ra. And so it's not Ra'ah or Ro'ah, it's Ra. So I got it wrong twice. Let you guys know that you need to fact check even me. But anyways, but yeah, it's the tree of knowledge of Tov and Ra, right? And here it's not saying it's the tree of knowledge of good and calamity, or the tree of knowledge of good and natural disaster, or the tree of knowledge of good and bad tidings, or something like that, right? It's saying it's the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And there's various other verses that we could use that kind of show like a similar thing, right? Like saying in Genesis 3:5, it says, man has now become like us, knowing Tov and Ra, knowing good and evil. Or in Genesis 6:5, it says, God saw that the heart of man was Ra continually, right? Or evil continually. He's not talking about calamity or stuff like that, right? He's talking specifically about evil. And so when we go now to Isaiah 45:7, in my opinion, the only reason people translate that word calamity is because they don't want to, quote unquote, put God on the hook for evil. The thing is God is perfectly willing to put himself on that hook. And that, I think, is something that we kind of need to accept in a way. Now, to be clear, I do not believe that God is the author of sin. The Westminster Confession is not binding, right? But I think it puts it very succinctly here. It says, God from all eternity did, by the most wise and holy counsel of his own will, freely and unchangeably ordain whatsoever comes to pass. That would include the evil. Yet so as thereby, neither is God the author of sin, nor is violence offered to the will of the creatures, nor is liberty or contingency of second causes taken away, but rather established. In other words, the means by which what God ordained takes place is the will of the creature who freely wills to do that which he genuinely wishes to do, right? He's not, in other words, I'm not incapable physically or mentally of getting off of this stream right now, nor am I doing this stream against my own will right now, right? So in other words, sourcehood I will to do what I want to do, and alternative causes, I could do something else, both exist here in me doing the stream. But through my free will and through my ability to act in those ways, God has ordained that I would do this stream tonight, right? So in Isaiah 45:7, what you have going on is God declaring that he has ordained all things, and that includes the bad things.
Wait. Now you're talking about a God who's like other and he's like set apart and outside the creation and stuff. That's the kind of God you're talking about, CJ.
Right, exactly.
Okay. No, I'm
Um,
doing humor.
no, I know. I totally get what you're saying because it's right.
and making a point. Hopefully the audience gets what I'm saying.
Exactly, right? And it's I understand why people don't want to put God on the proverbial hook. The thing is, he puts himself there, not only in Isaiah 45:7, but also in Amos 3:6, where he says, "Is there evil in the city, and the Lord hath not done it?" Right? Also in Acts, I can't remember the exact chapter and verse, but when he says that he foreordained before the foundation of the world the crucifixion of Christ, he's the author of the story, and he's the one who wrote it all down, so to speak. And there's no way that we are able to take that away from him, right? And actually, Paul T just posted in the live chat another good example. He says, for this cause, God shall send them strong delusion that they should believe a lie. Who's sending the strong delusion? It's not Lucifer. It's not autonomous human creatures. It's God. Now, in Romans 1, he is, sending it on account of, it's like a punishment because of what they want to do. Again, I think the Westminster Confession puts it perfectly by saying, that violence is not offered to the creature. God is not the author of sin, and liberty or contingency of second causes is not taken away. But nevertheless, I think that the King James actually is more correct in Isaiah 45:7 than most other versions are, because it's not, it was written by it was translated, by a bunch of Calvinists, and being Calvinists, they weren't particularly bothered by the fact that Ra means evil. Whereas a lot of modern translations are not written by Calvinists, and they are kind of bothered by the fact that Ra means evil. And so they kind of change what the definition of that word is. But again, it is important for us to explain that properly. We're not saying that God is like the author of sin, but I remember I was talking to somebody once about this argument that I get in sometimes with non-Calvinists, and I was talking, well, this whole thing is about whether or not God ordains evil, and I think that it's obvious that he does. And this person responded back to me, well, if he didn't do it, who exactly do they think did? And I thought it was just so perceptive, because it was one of those things where it's like, yeah, no, seriously, it's like, is he God or is he not? Did he author the story or did he not author the story? A lot of people have this dualistic version of theology in their head, where there's the yin god and the yang god, and fighting with each other, like Dark Lords of the Sith or something like that. But that's not what the Bible presents. The Bible presents a God who is wholly set apart from creation, and is sovereign over all things, and then we all are the players.
Brother, can I put it this way too? Because Lord Jesus went to the cross to make God obvious, and he specifically bore sins. I don't see how someone can say, if God predetermined that it was going to go this way, that his reconciliation is not somehow good enough to justify him, considering he went to the cross to bear the sins of the entire world. The propitiation for our sins, and not only those which are our own, but also for the entirety of the world. And so I understand what the objection is. Because of the gospel. That's why I don't understand how there's an objection.
Yeah, and I think that with a lot of people, I think that the problem they kind of run into is it's like they find it impossible to detach the author from the characters in his story. The thing that I always find ironic in it is that everybody does that when they're watching fiction or reading fiction or anything like that, right? Like they all kind of recognize. Nobody like watches Star Wars and thinks to themselves, "Oh my gosh, Anakin did this evil thing. I'm so mad at George
Oh,
Lucas now." They're mad at Anakin.
Hold on. Are you saying that God? Are you saying that God is not less set apart from us than George Lucas is from his own fiction?
Exactly.
Are you saying that what's the name of that Harry Potter woman? I forgot it.
J.K. Rowling.
Yeah, are you saying that J.K. Rowling is not more set apart from Harry Potter than God is from you? I mean, it's like you're saying God's the most set apart or something.
Right. No, exactly. I mean, it's 100% right. I mean, but it's a difficult truth to grasp, and I get why people don't grasp it. But but the Bible is clear on it. It literally just comes out and says the words that God
I get
creates
why
evil.
people don't grasp it. Often, I think it's explained in John chapter 3, and I know that's sad to say, but that's the truth.
Jog my memory a little bit. I'm not sure exactly what you're speaking of there.
And the humans loved the darkness more than the light. That is, they loved to not know the truth more than to see the truth, because their works had been toilsome. Because whosoever does flaw hates the light and does not come towards the light. But he who achieves the truth comes toward the light, so that his works may be made obvious in this manner, that they are having been worked in God. And that just happens to be the exact grammar of the Greek. So it might sound a little Calvinistic, but that's just what it says, that our works are having been worked in God. Or I should emphasize, are having been worked in God, right? So there's this past tense there.
Yeah, absolutely. And real quickly, Tomas, absolutely appreciate you asking the question, and thank you for graciousness in the response here. So next thing that I wanted to briefly respond to, and then this is the last thing, and then we'll jump kind of right back into open conversation here. But just briefly, Truth Defenders asked if I had seen James White's most recent debate on the Textus Receptus versus the original autographs. But nevertheless, I have not, and I apologize, Truth Defenders. I'm sure it was great. I haven't seen any of James White's most recent debates. I guess the most recent one I saw actually was probably when he was having a conversation with Tim Stratton. Was it Tim Stratton? No, it was William Lane Craig that I saw. And that was at the beginning of this year, I think. It was almost a year ago now. But nevertheless, after that, I haven't seen any of his recent debates. Anyways, though, let's go ahead and jump back into the topic of the conversation today. So, there are a couple things I think that are incredibly interesting that come up in this debate, and they came up particularly in the debate we just had. So, like, for example, when we started talking about Exodus 20 and 13, and the word used in Exodus 20:13, first off, to jog everyone's memory, the King James Version says, "Thou shalt not kill," which is kind of accurate, but not really. And every now and then you'll have, and not even really every now and then, it's actually, once you start talking to atheists, it's actually relatively common. You'll see some atheists read a King James Version and they'll say to themselves, isn't God contradicting himself here? He says, "Thou shalt not kill," and then he prescribes the death penalty for murder. Isn't that a contradiction? And the problem really lies in the usage of that word "kill," because the original Hebrew and the majority of modern translations actually will say "ratzach," which is murder. Thou shalt not murder, right? And what I was trying to say to
Was that related to the word evil? It sounds similar.
It could be. I guess I'm not actually sure about that. But I could see that being the case because it does have that "ra" at the beginning. I guess I would have to see if "tzach" is a word in and of itself. The concordance doesn't say anything about it. It says it's a primary root, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything. Concordances aren't aren't perfect.
Yeah, Mr. Strong didn't have the technology we have, so for him to get through, I mean, I'm going through the entire, just the Greek, so for him to get through the entire Greek and Hebrew, like, he couldn't spend, it was harder for him than it is for us, so in the same, like, amount of time, he couldn't delve as deep into things, right? So, but what the Strong's Concordance is, this is how I explain it, because he never disagrees with the KJV translation. So what it is it's Mr. Strong's explanation of why the KJV translates things certain ways. That's what and it's a concordance. It's to concord the KJV Bible to Greek dictionaries, right? So it is specifically for the KJV, more so it's not a lexicon specifically for the Greek language.
Right, which is funny actually, because a lot of KJV onlyists think Strong's was against the KJV, and he certainly was not. In fact, that's honestly somewhat slanderous.
It's absurd.
Yeah, exactly. But so I shared it here on the screen for you guys, so you can kind of see here the Hebrew word used, which, like I said, is ratzach. And if we scroll down here a little bit, you'll see that the definition is to murder or slay. And you can see here right on your right, ironically, that the first time we actually see it used is in Exodus 20 and 13, right? And Exodus 20 and 13 is saying, obviously, you shall not murder. It's not saying simply that you shall not kill. And one of the things I was trying to explain to Mr. Kinney is, every murder is a killing, just the same way that every boy is a male, right? But not every male is a boy, and not every killing is a murder, right? Well, some males are deer, some males are men, some males are teenagers, kind of in that adolescent stage, right? And obviously I brought up the deer one because you can even say, some deceptive things kind of existing.
Some males pretend to be females.
Unfortunately, that's exactly right. Yeah, I don't think the Hebrew has a word for them, except maybe confused. But nevertheless,
depends on how far they've gone with it. But let's just get back on topic.
Right. Oh wow, I actually didn't notice what you were saying at first, but then it kind of came to me. Anyways, so
and it's terrible that they are grooming children to eventually do that to themselves. As long as we're mentioning it, let's make use of that we mentioned it.
Yeah, well, and while we're also mentioning it too, it is important for us to say that the Bible is both contrary to eunuchism, for lack of a better term, and cross-dressing. So I think that is an important thing to realize here. A lot of people will say that the Bible doesn't address issues of transgenderism. It certainly does, even if it doesn't use the word transgender. Because there's no such thing as a transgender. I don't mean to be disrespectful, but transgender implies that you can somehow transcend your gender, and you cannot do so. Just like there's no such thing as transitioning, right? You can't. And again, I'm not trying to be rude to anybody, but truth is sometimes harsh, sometimes hurts. And when we say, before or after I transitioned, well, you can't transition. It's not something you're capable of doing any more than I can transition into a goldfish.
And there are people who actually have genetic abnormalities, or even with standard XY layouts, still they're not formed correctly. So they actually there's people with a real problem, like that's not something desirable. So, it's sort of like pretending that you're crippled to get to the front of the line. It's really, really offensive when they pretend to have. It's really offensive when people use people who actually have an undesirable defect, biological defect. They actually use that as an argument regarding people who are making a mockery of that for their own delusional purposes.
And all very true. But real quickly, just to get back to the thing here, although to be fair,
that's a good idea.
All good things, though. All good things to be said. Well, terrible things, but good words to be said. Things that need to be said. Anyways, so we see here this Hebrew is ratzach, right? And if you go down the line here, obviously it's in the, you shall not murder occurrence there. But also you can see you shall give for the manslayer, for the manslayer, for the manslayer in Numbers 35:6. 35:11 also says manslayer, 35:12 manslayer, murderer in 35:16. It actually shows up in Numbers 35 like almost 20 times. It's not even an exaggeration. In fact, I could count right now. Let's see.
Well, I don't know if I want to hear it be counted or if everybody does, but I could help you cut to the chase here though, because Will Kinney's argument against this was the KJV is not a translation, because his argument is when the translators were conveying a certain concept, but the thing is that you're trying to get back to the root text. And he had this way of always assuming his conclusion and posturing on that. And I don't know if he's dishonest or not, but sometimes it was really absurd how he would ignore the straightforward things that you were pointing out, which were just straightforward and undeniable. I don't know what that was all about, but it made a very bad impression on me.
Well, without trying to be dismissive of him as a person, I think I do know what it's all about, and it's simply that there's a level of cognitive dissonance he has to maintain in order to be a KJV only. The thing about Exodus 20:13, and even more so than the other three I brought up, Exodus 20:13 is just plainly wrong in the KJV. There's just no way of getting around it, right? It's like when the Martin Luther translation of Leviticus 18:22 uses the word for boy in Leviticus 18:22 rather than the word for male. The Hebrew is zakar, it's not yeled. Yeled being boy, zakar being male, right? And all boys are males, but not all males are boys, right? You can obviously be a teenager, you can be a man, you can be a different creature, like obviously a deer male, even though it's not going to be called a man, can still be called a male, right? So it's a more general word, and you have little smaller versions of that word inside it. It's the same thing with ratzach. Ratzach is a specific kind of killing, namely murdering, right? The word I have in front of you guys now, harag, is the word generally to kill. And he would point out, well, yeah, but Genesis 4:8, which you see on your screen now, says Abel, that Cain killed his brother Abel. And it's like, yes, because every time you murder somebody, you have killed them. But not every time you kill somebody have you murdered them. Those aren't the same thing. Like, you can interchange
so this is what I
with the other.
Because he was saying that since this was a murder, and it's not translated murder, but the thing is that it was God who chose to use the word kill here and the word murder in the other place. Sometimes cutting to the chase like that is really good. If you had said, look, it's God who chose to use the word kill in Genesis 4:8, but the word murder in, I don't have the verse memorized, but in the Ten Commandments, right? And I don't know that it really would have changed anything, but, it cuts to the chase.
Well, I think the main reason for explaining it is really for the audience, right? Because when he says, yeah, but it uses the word kill here, and this is a murder, it's like, right, and I can refer to a male deer as a male, but I can't refer to it as a man. Like, you have to, and so Will's not going to concede the point, and I freely grant that, but the audience can then see, oh, I get it. You can interchange kill for murder just like you can interchange it for capital punishment or interchange it for warfare or self-defense or anything like that, but you can't use murder the same way because murder is a more specific form. And in my opinion, to be honest with you,
so your point even is that to put murder here would literally be a false translation, not because Cain didn't murder Abel, but because God used the word kill, so God did not say that Cain murdered Abel.
Yeah, exactly. And there's nothing.
But you're also arguing that you can replace murder with kill, which means the King James Version is correct because you can replace murder with kill, or that's kind of what you just said.
So what I'm saying here is when you have this word harag, which means kill, you can translate it kill when it's talking about a murder. And you can translate it kill when, well, at first you have to translate it kill because that's the word. But you can use this word to describe a murder because murder is killing. And you can also use this word to describe going hunting because going hunting is also killing. But the word ratzach you could not use to describe going hunting because you don't murder a deer, but you do kill a deer, right? So the one word harag, or kill, has semantic range that encompasses any form of taking life. And the other word, ratzach, had semantic range that specifically encompasses murder.
Oh,
This
you
is why-
you can't replace the word murder with kill when you're being prescriptive, because then you prescribe something different. But when you're being descriptive, you're only being more vague. So when you're being prescriptive, you can't do the replacement.
Exactly, and it's this is why I use the example of males and men, right? I can use the word male to describe men, and I can use the word male to describe men or boys, the male. Oh my goodness, masculine generally. It doesn't help me to mix up the words here. I can use the word male to describe men, and I can use the word male to describe the XY chromosome having gender generally. But I can't use men to describe the XY chromosome generally if I'm trying to be specific, because men refers specifically to grown-up adult males. They're not boys, which would be little adult males, right? And the Hebrew has the same thing here in the sense that you have zakar, which would be males. You have gever or ish, both of which mean men, and you have yeled, which would mean boy. Gever and ish are specific kinds of zakars. Yaled also is a specific kind of zakar, but all of them are zakar. So I can use the word zakar to describe any of them, but I can't use the individual words to describe all zakars. It's the same thing you have going on here, right? All ratzachs are harags because with every time you ratzach someone, you've murdered them, you've killed them. But not all harags are ratzach. I can't say I ratzach a deer. I can't say that if someone attacked me, I ratzached them, right? Because that would be inaccurate. And so when we go now to Exodus 20:13, it doesn't say, thou shalt not harag, or kill. It says, thou shalt not ratzach, a specific kind of killing, right? Which is why it's not contradictory to say the penalty for killing or ratzaching, murdering, to be more specific, is death, right?
So to be simple, then the KJV actually bans hunting.
Exactly. There you go, right? And that's exactly the case. And it would be a very simple thing to rectify. All you would have to do is just translate the Hebrew word for what it actually means. But if you're Will Kinney, you can't do that because in order to do that, you have to concede the KJV got it wrong.
Very good.
CJ?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the analogy you made is pretty good. And I have here two versions that actually have the word murder. Is the Young translation and then 2000 Jubilee version. And so the Jubilee version say, thou shalt not murder. And the Young translation say, thou dost not murder.
Yeah, absolutely. And that would be the correct. And I think the New King James also translates it as murder.
New
go
King
ahead and look
James.
it up real quick. New King James, Exodus 20:13.
And then I want to talk about the behemoth. I hope there's still a good amount of people in chat because I know some facts on the behemoth thing, and everything just got kind of carried away, so I didn't get it in early.
Oh yeah, that's certainly fine. We have 17 still in the live chat, so it's certainly a pretty solid audience. By the way, appreciate all you guys who are here. And Speed Reader has confirmed that NKJV is murder, and I just pulled it up here as well, which it does say murder. So thank you, Speed Reader.
Okay. And to be clear, CJ, what you're saying is that you have done the careful research, so you're aware of the semantic distinction, and you can be relied on for that.
Exactly. Well, and also, and I want to be clear here, I'm not like an expert in this field, but I have been learning Hebrew for a little over a year now. I can read it almost perfectly, although I don't know what necessarily all the words mean. So when I talk about this kind of stuff, it's not like I'm just, on the fly looking up stuff on your Strong's Concordance. I've actually been studying the Hebrew language for some time, and hopefully at some point I'll be able to just come up here and Shalom Aleichem, Boker Tov, all that other kind of stuff. Technically, Boker Tov wouldn't work because it's not the morning, but nonetheless, it'd be
I do the Greek, but I'm a lot more focused on scrutiny than I am on memorization. So I'm starting to learn the language, but being a better and better scrutinizer is what I've been focusing on for a few years now. But are we ready to go to Behemoth, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go ahead and do that.
Oh,
Yeah.
CJ.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just not about this particular one, but in general. Well, just my opinion. You said the errors in the King James Version is not like misleading or doctrinal problem. Well, the way I see it is doctrinal problem because everything counts. Of course, there are some minor points, like for example the Job 40:17. But there are very important issues with errors, including this one that we are just addressed on the murder versus killing. And I think every error is misleading.
Yeah, and so let me say the last part you say there, every error is misleading. That is certainly true. In a way, it's almost a tautology, right? Because it's kind of like it wouldn't be an error if it wasn't misleading. So I certainly would agree with you there. And you're not 100% wrong on Exodus 20:13 here, really, because it does create an issue where people say the Bible is contradictory when it was actually in its original language quite plain. And in most of the other versions, it's also very consistent, which that's one of the unfortunate things is the KJV is not the only English version. We have 151, and while some of them are complete trash, no doubt, a lot of them yeah, right, exactly. And a lot of them are in fact the New King James Version is, I think, just a King James Version that updates the errors. It's really it doesn't have all of the thus saith, but it has a lot of it. It still maintains some of the robust ancient nature of it, and it's a great version.
I do remember there's some changes that it makes that are less literal and that I have problems with. It's been a while since I've looked into it, but the changes, they do go both ways.
Right. Well, but no, nevertheless, though, my point there is just to say
but then again,
I think you're making a good point, Alex.
And I want to say I also disagree with you guys about modern translations. Any translation that changes what may or may not be a reference to circumcision, but is definitely talking about people cutting themselves off from salvation. And it's literally the words, they who are troubling you are going to cut themselves off. And any translation that specifies that that's some kind of very vulgar insistence that they should, eunuchify themselves, they should, emasculate is the proper word to not be too far with it. Any translation that specifies as if that's saying to emasculate themselves, it's just very clear that that's not even the intention. And even if it were, that's an interpretation. It's not a translation. And any translation that has that in it, to me, is just as bad as like the gay translation, which includes like the NIV and just all sorts of them. I'll do a video on it sometime because I'm pretty passionate about this, that modern scholarship, the beast is going to have power over all languages and all nations. You see what I mean? It's not all power, but it's power over all of them. He has deliberately interfered with academia to make war against the church, and it's up to us to be as shrewd as serpents and to actually do something about it. And I'm not just talking, I'm trying to do what I know how to do. And upcoming content on that in the future. So that is on topic of the general debate, and but we can't get too much into it because it's not really the focus topic.
Well, it is certainly, worthy of being brought up, though, so I don't have any issue there. Alex, you look like you were about to say something.
No, I'm fine. Yeah, I agree.
I will say really quickly, one of the things I really appreciate about having both of you guys here is, whereas my expertise is in Hebrew, quote unquote expertise, right? Nick's is more on Greek. And then Alex, you have a different native tongue than us, so you can say, hey, well, as it turns out, the translations in Portuguese say this. And that really is helpful, right? Because a lot of people, we get wrapped up in this idea like the Bible has only ever been translated in English, and it's not true at all, right? It goes out to all the languages. And so it's very helpful to see this is a Portuguese Bible and this is what it said, and to compare the two and see, like, do they line up with the original Greek and Hebrew and all that other kind of, I mean, it's very helpful, I think.
And may I ask,
it
Alex,
is.
how
Yeah,
connected
sure.
is the Portuguese to like the Latin? So that is it like connected to the Latin Vulgate? And the Portuguese language is similar to Latin. Is that the case, or am I mistaken?
Well, I basically don't know Latin at all, but I know that my language comes from Latin and other languages as well: French, Spanish, Romanian, Italian. All of these languages come from Latin, but I basically don't know anything about.
So then that's
the
probably really
Latin.
useful, though, that the way that comes up through the Latin with you and more through the Greek with us, and Latin and Greek have a very different relationship than English and Greek. So yeah, very good.
Yeah, it's very mixed. Even English has a lot of Latin words, and even some are written this in the same way, just change the pronunciation.
Yeah, and with that, let's go ahead and divert now to Job 40:17, because I know that Brother Nick has a lot to say about that. Real briefly, I want to kind of lay out for the audience sake what my kind of point and position was on that. So Job 40:17 talks about the sinews of his pachad are closely knit together. And the word pachad is translated as stones in the KJV, as well as some older versions like your Wycliffe and the original Geneva, though the Geneva 1599 will change that. And it's translated as thighs in the majority of your translations, both old and new, like, for example, Geneva 1599, but also NKJV, NASB, stuff like that. Now, the usage of the word pachad is very unique in Job 40:17, because it's the only time that word is used to describe whatever it's describing in Job 40:17. But there is a identical word. I think it's the same word, and I think most scholars would agree with me. It is the same word, but it's just not being used the same way. Pachad, which means terror, dread, or fear. And it's used probably 4 or 5 other times in the rest of the Hebrew Bible.
74 other times.
Okay, so that's always got to make sure we're. By the way, real quickly to the audience, that was a good example of why I always tell you guys, make sure that you fact check me. Even though you like me, you still need to fact check me because I get stuff wrong. But nonetheless, thank you for that.
Yeah, because I've looked into this one before, and I was really interested in creationism and different arguments about translation and potentially, I really wanted to know what can I rely on. That's how I ended up digging into the Greek myself, because I was like, well, this way I can check what I can rely on after I inspect it for myself. So, but yeah, here, this is Hebrew, which is not as much my specialty, but when I first started, I was doing equally with both. And it's literally the same word with the exact same vowel points, which, if I understand correctly, that usually, if they have two different definitions of the same word, they'll switch up some vowel points, is fairly typical. Is that right,
Yes,
CJ?
absolutely.
Yeah, so it's the exact same vowel points even. Now, what I think it is I think it, his tail swings like a cedar. The sinews of his terror are stitched together, while a brachiosaur's tail is its weapon. So I think it's still talking about the tail. The terror is the weapon, which is the tail, and its sinews is stitched into the rest of the strength, which was talked about in the previous two verses. Is kind of the way that I'd put it.
Yeah, and I don't think that's a improper translation at all, because here's what we have without assuming the positions. We have this word pachad, which references fear, terror, or dread, being used to describe the sinews of something that are tightly knit together on an animal, and it's around that hip region, right? So the options that are typically presented are thighs or stones, which would be a euphemism for testicles. And in the case of what Nick is doing here is translating the word literally, saying there's no reason to use the euphemism. It's just simply the sinews of his terror.
It only appears once. If someone's going to have a case that must be something like thighs or something, I'd have to see the case for myself. When they start talking about other nearby cultures and stuff, um, that's a lot of the times when they get into mixing things together that shouldn't be, and they get into error and stuff. So someone would have to make the case and convince me. But otherwise, I have reason to suspect it's not a good case. If it's only used once, supposedly, it's the same word. If it's the terror, then just read it in context. So yeah, that is what I'm doing.
Well, and here's the thing, as far as, and let me kind of lay out the point I was making in the argument here, because what you're doing and what I'm doing here, and what most modern versions are doing, are actually in a way the same thing, because the word means terror or dread. That's what it means. You could also say fear. But nevertheless, that's the whole general idea, right? And here in Job 40:17, it's being used by Job somewhat euphemistically. Whatever he's referring to a body part as the dread or terror of this animal. Now, most people who translate it as thighs say, and this is what my argument was, the strength of an animal, or the area of the animal in which you would find people dreading it, where it's generating its ferocity, is going to be typically, because they're four-legged, and this is even really true for a lot of us as well, going to be in the back of the animal, right? Namely the sorry, I got one of these porn bots in the live chat. I don't understand how these things actually even happen. YouTube apparently has the technology to censor words before they even come out, but they don't have the technology to censor freaking porn bots. It makes no sense to me. Sorry.
Sorry, I should have saw that. I have a
Well,
wrench.
there's no common themes in how they name themselves ever, or at least in those cases, they at least get those ones. Sarcasm, sarcasm.
No kidding. Also, Kelby, you're fine. I appreciate you. But yeah, definitely be on the lookout for those, because it seems like the more of an audience we get, the more likely they are to show up. But I appreciate you.
Hey, what do you guys think of the First John 5:7? Because recently I was going through that, and I was reminded when I was going through all the different versions on Bible Hub, the discrepancy there with the King James. If you're familiar with that, which
Well, if I may, I think we should finish the behemoth topic first, because I think.
Oh yeah, definitely. Because I was going to ask Alex what those are in the general Portuguese Bibles for those two that seem to. But yeah, I don't want to give you really anything.
Yeah, well, and let me make
I-
sure to write that down. That way I don't forget about it. 1 John 5:7. All right, that'll be what we talk about next.
You know, and also 1 Timothy 3:16.
Absolutely. 1 Timothy 3:16. All
Thanks.
right. Absolutely, no doubt.
So I know there's one more thing I wanted to say, CJ, and then you can close off finishing your explanation. Is that
Go ahead.
you presented that so well. You know, I mean, I know you weren't in agreement with me that it's just the word terror and refers to the tail as a weapon, but for your perspective on it, you presented it so well because, like, when you said you were bringing up the reason that Mr. Strong gives for the KJV translating it that way, that it's you know, his stones as akin to be ashamed if people were to see them or something, right? So he's embarrassed that people see his privates. The behemoth is embarrassed that people see his privates. Like, does that really make sense?
Right, and on top of that too, and I appreciate that, but on top of that too, it's also something to, like, you know, and I appreciate Strong's tremendously. The man he did a lot of good work. He was brilliant. He had limited technology, and we always need to be aware of the fact that we are in a blessed time.
And when he was concording the KJV, he did his best to explain why they translated it that way.
Exactly. But if we start looking at it, given the modern information, we know the word means terror or dread. It doesn't actually mean shame, right? So it almost doesn't work to say the the sinews of his terror or the sinews of his dread are closely knit together if that's supposed to be the thing he's ashamed of, because those aren't the same word, right? Unless it's like, I guess the best argument you could make is fear. You could say, like kind of like you had just said, the behemoth is somehow afraid that somebody might see its private part, but that's not the way the Bible talks about it. And also, it's an animal, so that doesn't even like remotely make sense.
Yeah, no, it's obviously not the case there, but the reason I say terror is because terror can be something that terrifies, or it can be that you are terrified. And when I did the research, as I remember, that's the way the Hebrew word is it can mean fear or a terror, like something that causes fear. It can mean both. So terror does the same thing in English, so therefore I use terror.
Right. Well, and here's the other thing about it too. You know, Will had said that the word for testicles is not actually found in the Bible. And by the way, I apologize for the audience sake. I know this is somewhat crass, but it is the subject. But that's not actually true. In fact, there's not only is the word for testicles in the Bible, but there's also euphemistic words that are used in the Bible. So I'm going to show you guys real quick. This is the word ishek. And ishek means just literally testicles, right? You can see right here a testicle. It's used in Leviticus 21:20, and it's not a euphemism. It's not a it's not an allegory or anything like that. It's not metaphorical. That's just what the word means, and you can find it there in your Leviticus 21:20. And there are other words, of course, that would be used more euphemistically than this word is actually here. But the point is just to say, we have words for thigh, we have words for testicle, but we have this word here that's being used somewhat euphemistically to describe this part of the animal, and it's not used this way ever again. So we have to kind of put some of the pieces together. We know it's not literally saying this, that, or the third, but it is using this word to refer to something euphemistically, and that thing is what we're trying to get at here. Now, does it make sense that the sinews of an animal's dread would be its testicles? I don't think so. I in fact, because you have to rule out the idea of the animal's personal embarrassment, because I own 2 dogs, and I can tell you for sure that they are not embarrassed about their testicles. Well, only one of them is a boy, but nonetheless. It's and my cats, for the record, aren't either. It's just not something that animals feel. Excuse me, I had it right the first time. But on top of that, there's just, it's not the kind of thing that would cause dread in something else, right? Like, nobody is out there yeah, I'm sorry to be crass, but nobody is out there looking at an animal's testicles and then suddenly feeling dread. That's just not a thing. But if dread is used here to refer to a weapon or the strength of the animal, which makes perfect sense, then you could see how it would be euphemistically referring to, excuse me, the thighs, or in the case of what Nick is saying here, the tail even. Both of those are much more viable than the phrase than the phrase stones, because in both of those you could actually just translate the word literally as dread or terror, and it would still suffice, right?
May I mention, also, the tail is what was mentioned before, so then when something's called a terror, I'm just going back to what exists in the text, and it makes sense because it's a weapon. Just another little detail.
No, well, it's not a bad detail to add here at all, too, right? And the other thing I think that is especially important as it pertains to this is, you know, Job is somewhat poetic. It's not poetic in the same way the Psalms are, but it is certainly more poetic than other books of the Bible, especially Job chapter 40 and 39 and so on, those later portions, right? And I'll just kind of be incredibly blunt with it. You know, talking about animal testicles isn't very poetic. It kind of breaks the feel of the story. Whereas the other things that are being referenced, his tail is like a cedar, his strength is in his loins, the sinew of his dread is sewn together. Like that all sounds like a poetic and awesome description of an animal. Job just taking a random detour here to talk about animal stones. It's just weird. You know what I mean? Like it's almost like it's strangely perverse for no reason. It breaks the poetic flow of it, and it just doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense.
I agree.
Real quickly, too, while we're on this, I want to share with you guys because Will had made the argument that the word is not found elsewhere, and me and Nick are saying that it is.
You're doing a wonderful job just with the factual scrutiny here.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, real quick, let's move forward to 6:3:44. So you can see here.
You said the word testicle is never used, but it is. And then also, I mean, it seemed to me that he had to know what you were talking about here, but he didn't want the audience to know. And I don't know how else I could really sensibly interpret what was happening. So I don't know if he, I don't want to like accuse, but I do want to say that that's what it looks like to people. So he might want to be aware that that's what it looks like.
Well, and here's the thing, even if you're not accusing, it is still important for him to know that, because if we're doing apologetics, the look of deception, whether or not it's intentional or not, the look of deception does the exact opposite. It does not provide an apology or a defense. It actually turns people off. In fact, this is one of the big reasons. I'm going to take a brief detour here, but this is one of the main reasons why, when it comes to stuff like the slaughter of the Canaanites, why I just come out and be very blunt with people. Yes, Kol Hanishama means everything that breathes. That is what it means. Let's just get that out of the way, because what you have with all these modern apologists, they'll tap dance around it. They'll say, no, that's not really what it means. It's just what it says. And it's like, okay, well, that didn't help anything at all. If anything, you just told all the atheists that you're not being honest with your supposedly holy text, right? And I say supposedly because you're the person who's supposed to be saying it's holy, and you seem to have no problem butchering it. And they do the same thing with slavery. The Bible doesn't actually endorse slavery. Now, let me tell you why biblical slavery is different. Well, hang on a minute. Does it not endorse slavery, or is biblical slavery different? Those, you can't have both. It's one or the other, right? I think it's the latter. Biblical slavery is not cruel the way that a lot of other slaveries are, but it's certainly endorsed. There's just no doubt about that. You can't sit here and make a coherent argument that the Bible does not condone a form of slavery. In fact,
the issue I think is pretty easy to handle, because there's literally laws where, like, if you're going to discipline your slave hitting them, then you better not injure them, because then there's going to be penalties, and you better not kill them, because then is it the death penalty for killing them? But I don't remember for sure, but it's definitely penalties. So there's we imagine like slavery must be abusive, but if it got to the point of anything that was threatening an injury, then they were taking a risk of like getting criminally charged if they did injure the person. So
Yeah, exactly. And
and someday people might not have to work because robots do all the work and work is an option. And they'll talk about how we were so evil because we insisted that people need to work for a living. We were just so evil because we didn't let people be free. We made them be having to work. It's just absurd. The whole like slavery in itself is not a sin. It may be good to move past slavery. According to the Bible, debt is slavery, and the American dollar is literally made of debt. For each dollar, there's more than a dollar owed back. And so our money is literally slavery. We're still in a slave system. That's if you believe the Bible, which says that to be in debt is to be a slave.
yeah,
I
and
agree.
while
It's Babylon. All the money.
yeah, exactly. Well, and while we're on that, let's just also point out the Bible also says that usury is illegal, and yet we charge interest all the time. In fact, that's just a basic function of the economy is charging interest. And is that not some form of servitude? I mean, the bank can literally come take your house if you don't pay them not only the loan you got, but also like 150% on top of it if you actually do the math over the amount of time it usually takes to pay. Anyways, though, I'm getting on a tangent. The point is, honesty is important because it turns people off and it does the exact opposite of what your apologetic is supposed to do. But so here's this word pachad, right? And you can see on your right, Job 40:17. Real quickly, I want you guys to focus here on what I'm highlighting, right? Notice you have there this is the P sound, this is a ha sound, and this is a D sound, like duh, right? It's pe, ha, and he, excuse me, and dalit. So that's pachad, as you can see there. The actual word that is used, the verb form of it that is used in Job. Sorry, the computer has a hard time highlighting Hebrew because it goes left to right. So is right here. It's pachada. You can see it there, but it's just a verb form of pachad. But notice here that this is the same spelling as a word I'm about to show you. And notice these little lines underneath. Those are not found in your original Bibles because the ancient Hebrew language did not have those. But notice I said P, a chad sound that we don't have in modern English, but you could kind of say KH if you wanted to. Obviously here it's translated CH, but for us that would look like pachad, but it's not how you say it. And then the dalet would make like a D sound. Notice there's no vowels. Yeah, Hebrew does not have vowels. So pachad here is 3 consonants, and every other word in Hebrew is also going to be collections of consonants. These lines underneath are added later on, and they are supposed to indicate the vowel sound in order to make Hebrew a easier language to read. Although if you actually know the language, you are supposed to basically wean those out as time goes on so that you can better understand it as it's meant to be written. And I have not yet at that point, unfortunately, but nonetheless. So you can see here pachad. And if you look here, one occurrence, what we have in Job 40:17. Oh, hang on, CJ. I thought you were about to say there's more than one occurrence. Well, let's go to 6:3:43. And first off, notice the English transliteration is identical, pachad, right? Now we go to the spelling, which is identical, right? Pe, he, and dalit. And look at those vowel marks. They're also identical. So this is the same exact word, pachad, as the word that we saw there in 6:3:44. The reason why 6:3:44 is different is because if you go down here to definition, here it says thigh. Obviously, in the KJV, it says stones. And Brother Nick has provided us a possibility that it could also be referencing the tail. But the point is, it's not referencing what it typically references in Job 40:17. At least that's the common thought. If you go back to 6343 here, you can see that the word means dread, right? But it's the same spelling, it's the same pronunciation, it's the same vowel marks, which is, of course, why it's the same pronunciation. So we know that this is the same word. And actually, you can even see, well, this would actually be other way around. But nevertheless, that one word is a derivative of the other word, right? And the Job 40:17 is the derivative one, with this being the original one. In fact, if we go back here, I can just show that to you guys so you don't have to take my word for it. Let's see here. Where is it? Same as Pachad. Let's click on that. Oh, what do you know? It's 6343, right? So, and it does say it's probably a foreign origin. I don't really know if that's true or false, but I would imagine it's probably false. Nevertheless, that is at least what Strong suggests. Now, this word means dread. Dread is found numerous other places here. We see the fear of Isaac, Genesis 31:42. We see swore by the fear of his father, Genesis 31:53. We see terror and dread falling upon certain individuals in Exodus 15:16. I believe that's on the Israelites. We see to put the dread and the fear of you in the Canaanites here in Deuteronomy 2:25. And not to belabor the point, you get the idea, right? This word here describes dread, fear, terror, things of that nature. And it's found numerous other places in Scripture. In fact, we scrolled down here. Let's see. Nick said it was 74. This one says 49, but I think there's also another tab.
No. Well, maybe if there might be another tab, but I thought I remembered it being 74 and 1 was 75, but it's possible it was 49 and 1 is 50. They're both round numbers.
Well, I think what it is here is, so you see this one, it's the same word, slightly different vowels there, but this is more the action to dread, be in dread. And I think that's where the additional ones you would have would be from. Let's see.
Oh, yeah. Is there 25 of them? Yep.
Yes, there is. So,
okay,
yeah, you got it right.
So, yeah, that's where I got it from. So my memory was pretty good, huh? It's been a couple years since I've checked that fact.
Yeah, no doubt. And
I'm not good at memorizing things. It's if something's relevant to me and it has a lot of meaning, then I'll remember it. But I'm not good at like raw memorization at all.
Well, and so here's the ultimate point that I'm getting at here, right? This word is a known word, but it just has an unknown usage. It's not that this 6344 pachad is used one time. It's that it is used in an unknown way one time. So the question that we have to ask ourselves is, what makes the most sense for Job, who is speaking euphemistically, to use this word to describe, right? Does it make sense for him to say the sinews of his dread are knit together, and that be in reference to his stones? Not really. That seems a little odd, right? Does it make sense for him to say the sinews of his thighs are knit together, and that mean dread? Well, yeah, it definitely does, because the thigh is where the strength of the animal comes from, where you would start to dread the animal most. And alternatively, with what Brother Nick was presenting, would it make sense to say the sinews of his dread are knit together, and that be a reference to his tail? Well, if he's got a cedar-like tail, of course it would, because even not only is that where his strength derives, but the tail is quite literally a weapon. If the tail is that big.
That you've pointed out that I want to point out how it goes into my argument is you said that it's not an unknown word, but we have an unknown usage. Well, according to how I read it, that's not an unknown usage. It's actually the word terror is used to describe something as being a terror other places in the exact same way. It's not a tail in the other cases, but it's the same thing. You can call a person a terror, right? Sometimes you'll call a toddler a little terror. And so it actually is used the same way other places.
Well, and that's actually even a perfectly fair point. If you take the interpretation that you have here, you actually no longer have an unknown quantity. You just have a perceived unknown quantity, right? But nonetheless, in neither scenario does stones seem to make a whole lot of sense, especially given that we do have existing words for your quote stones, and it's not pakad. That word is shek, right? That I had showed you guys earlier, which the claim was made that the word for testicles is not actually found in the Old Testament. That's just simply not true. And on top of that, there is also euphemism that is used in scripture, right? It's Deuteronomy. I can't remember exactly where it might be 23:2, but nevertheless, there is a area where the Hebrews themselves also would refer to the testicles as stones in a euphemistic kind of way, and I believe it's Deuteronomy 23:2 where it uses that to describe somebody's testicles, but I'm not 100% sure on that. I'd have to double check myself. Nevertheless, you guys get the idea. In no functional translation of this word does stones really make a whole lot of sense, because that's just simply not what the word means, and it's just simply not what the word appears to be describing. The only way I think you can really get around this is just to kind of assume the KJV is your standard. Well, the KJV is the standard, and so that's what it says, and we're just kind of done there, right? The other thing too, and I don't know if maybe his sources are just different. I don't want to accuse him of being deceptive or anything like that, but he said that the JPS Tanakh translated this as here. Let me get to the Bible comparisons. Translated this as stones. That's not true. I'm going to go ahead and show you guys that. And the reason that that would be an important point is because JPS Tanakh is translated by the Jews, right? So people who you would think knew Hebrew pretty well. And if we go down here, JPS Tanakh in 1977, the sinews of his thighs are knit together. Now, maybe because it does say 1917, and I said 77 just now, sorry, it does say 1917, so perhaps there is other versions of the JPS Tanakh that I'm not aware of.
Well, I'll check what year mine is, and I'll get back to you in a moment.
Okay. Nevertheless, though, it does appear that whether it's updated or it's the original translation, that is not what the JPS Tanakh appears to have here. And actually, let's continue to go through some of this, because maybe we'll have another version. Let's see. Coverdale, Bishops.
Okay, mine's 1999, and as I remember, it says thighs, but I should double check. Is Job sort of, do you know where it's located? I'm thumbing through pretty fast here. After the Psalms, huh? After the
I
Proverbs?
believe so.
Okay.
Yeah, it
Job
is in the same
40.
section.
What verse number?
17.
Okay, I gotta go that way with the page. He makes his tail stand up like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are knit together. Of course, I disagree with stand up there, but that's beside the point.
Right. Well, and notice here too, if we look at
So
older
did we stretch
versions.
from 1917 to 99?
Say again?
So we did a span there from 1917 to 1999, but it's still
Yes,
been
sir.
20 years since then.
Right. So maybe an updated version or an older version says what Will Kinney says, but at least by what we have here, it appears that that is not correct. But notice also here too, you have older English Bibles. Geneva Bible 1587 does say stones, although Geneva Bible 1599 says thighs. So the Geneva updated and eventually changed to thighs. Only 12 years later, by the way. But nevertheless, Bishop's Bible doesn't actually say either. It says all his sinews are stiff. Coverdale Bible, which is 1535, says all his veins are stiff, which even here, I mean, these are obviously completely different than either, but it certainly is not agreeing with the translation of stones, right? If you go down
Can I
here
just
for
say that I don't even think it's hard to translate and understand. It's just terror, and it's referring to the tail, and all of this is just silly to me.
well, I mean, in a lot of ways, it really is, right? I mean, like, but notice here, it's like Lamza, sinews of his thighs bulge out. Pashida, sinews of his thighs. Catholic public domain. Oh, I don't really care about that, but it does say thighs for the record. Um, it's just um, all his nerves. That's really weird. Brenton Septuagint. All his nerves are wrapped together. That's definitely wrong. Uh, but regardless, the point that I'm trying to make here, friends, is just to say.
Oh, I know why they say nerves. Because sinews is kind of a vague word, and they're like the sinews of his terror you feel through your nerves, and they get nerves that way. I'm pretty sure, which is wrong, but I think that's where they get it.
Yeah, and so let's see what we do. So Webster says male organ, so that agrees with King James. Let's see. Obviously, King James. New King James is against. King James 2000 is against. New Heart, World English. I mean, for the most part, you're talking about a very small minority. American King James says stones, so we're at 4 now. I think Douay Reims says testicles. But you see what I mean? Like, it's just, you're talking about such a minority, and older English versions say thighs. The Hebrew versions say thighs. Greek versions say thighs. Aramaic say thighs. All of them, of course, trying to still explain the euphemism of terror. But nevertheless, they all recognize that the euphemism of terror just does not work with stones. It's just simply not there. And like I said, even though none of these reference tail or translate it literally as terror, Nick's translation is certainly more viable than the translation of stones, because stones just doesn't make any sense.
Okay, maybe we should let them do the next topic now.
Well, yeah, if either of you guys have any comments, definitely speak now or forever hold your peace. No, I'm just kidding. But nonetheless, or we'll just jump right to 1 John 5:7.
Well, it's also good to know that, or to keep in mind that, of course, God allowed this particular way to be, well, for this to be said like this in Hebrew, even knowing that there would be all of these various views on it, which is interesting to keep in mind, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And that is, of course, incredibly important. Well, I'll save the rest of my comment because I've been talking a lot. Alex, go ahead.
Kelby, did you want to ask the question again? And I think you were inquiring to Alex about something regarding John, the book of John somewhere.
So there are
Or First John.
two different verses that I've basically just come to realize that any Bible that doesn't have these, it must be suspect, you know. And the verses are 1 John 5:7, which is pretty well known. It's the Johannine comma verse, I think.
That is correct.
And because just recently I was just kind of it's like I knew about it before or read about it at some point or several times and then forgot about it until it directly applied to what I was looking at. So then recently I was going through each of the the verses on Bible Hub and was just kind of like, why, for what reason are these? Is this translated like this where they remove the Trinity? And it just kind of got to me. And then the other one, of course, is 1 Timothy 3:16, where the God was manifest in the flesh, versus just saying He was manifest in the flesh. And obviously, in the King James version, for both of these, I believe have the true and proper presentation of the sentiment that is meant.
Well, real quickly, before I am interested, Alex, in what the Portuguese would say there. But I do want to say, for the record, and I believe 1 John 5:7 does belong there, so I want to be clear here. But the reason most Bibles that take this verse out do, in fact, take this verse out is because they don't believe it's original. And the reason they don't believe it's original is because it appears very late in the manuscript tradition, sometime like the 12 or 1300s. There are arguments against that, like it appears to be referenced in by numerous church fathers. It is
Yeah, I found it.
present.
Yeah, exactly. There's quote fathers that quote that. So I would question whoever, like I would question the scholarship that would say, because a lot of the church fathers have been found at various times, and there's, yeah, it's, you know what I mean.
You got another bot. I don't have a. Okay.
Yeah, I grabbed that. Thank you though. Do you not have a wrench?
No, I don't have a wrench anymore.
Yeah, so you know what happened there? I deleted all wrenches at some point to kind of clear the cache, so to speak. And
Yeah, I thought it might have been something like that, but I didn't know. And I asked you about it in an email, but you must have been too busy. I wrote a couple of emails to you, and maybe neither one of them was short, knowing me.
well, and real quickly though, to Kelly, to your point, also Nick, drop a comment in the live chat just so I can fix that problem, if you would.
Yeah.
But Kelby, to your point, I completely agree, and the fact that we actually have certain people quoting it. Now, the interesting thing about this verse is that a lot of people have, like for example, the modalists are actually firm defenders of this verse. Ironically enough, it's kind of an interesting thing, which is part of the reason why certain more Trinitarian guys like James White have not been as eager to defend it as others in the past have. But I think that's actually a poor way of looking at it, because regardless of what place you come down on there, the question is really, does it belong there or not? Not so much what doctrine does it teach. And if it does belong there, then you have the question of, okay, why are you removing it? And I think it's pretty obvious why somebody might remove it. It's to diminish the divinity of Christ. I also shoot, wrong thing. Come on, really? Can I undo
It
that?
doesn't matter. I'm not even chatting. He just timed me out, guys.
Okay. Oh my goodness. I think I did just make you a mod though. I apologize. Anyways though, I think the reason modalists are more willing to defend it is because they still accept divinity of Christ, whereas an Arian obviously wouldn't. But nevertheless, you still have that question of we have church fathers referencing it. Sure, it's not in the older manuscript tradition, but it is in the Vulgate, and the Vulgate's a 1500-year translation. So it's clearly there. So why, what gives? Why are people removing this from their Bibles?
Wait. You're saying it's in the Vulgate in the sense that we would have every reason to think it's been in the Vulgate for 1500 years, and they're acting like it doesn't appear until 12 or 1300. Is that the facts?
And
that
just
you were
refresh me,
divulging
that's
to us?
Jerome's translation, right?
That is
His
correct.
Latin translation, where he was like, we don't need your Septuagint, we don't need this or that. We're going straight from the original Hebrew to, like, from whatever he had available at the time from Jewish synagogues, etc. And then he went straight from Hebrew to Latin.
Yeah, exactly. And to your question, Nick, yeah, it is in the now. The argument that a lot of people will say is because it's not in the majority of manuscripts, and because it appears in the manuscript tradition so late, they would argue that there's reason to believe the Vulgate added the doctrine or the verse 1 John 5:7. But I think that's kind of ad hoc personally, because basically what you have is it's there in the Vulgate, and then you have people trying to say, okay, how does that jive with what we have in the manuscript tradition? And so they therefore theorize that it's actually been added into the Vulgate translation.
Yeah,
But I
no
think
way.
exactly right. It's the exact opposite. We have an older version, so it seems more
It's
like
dubious.
Say again.
Eusebius quotes it.
Yeah, and even a couple before. In fact, real quickly, brief name drop. Look up Jonathan Sheffield, guys in the audience, or anybody on the panel for that matter. Look up Jonathan Sheffield and his defense of not only the Kama Johannium, but also of the Pericope Adulterae, Luke 24:37, which is the Father forgive them verse, and also the last 12 verses of Mark. It's amazing how old.
I've heard some of the worst arguments about Mark. Like, they say that Mark keeps saying, like, and all throughout the book. And then suddenly he stops saying and all the time. Well, yeah, he's at the end. He's gotten to the destination. The whole point is there's this energy culminating to it. And, like, I'll have to do a video on this one, too, because I commented on this. And actually, the arguments that supposedly that's not original there in Mark are extremely weak. And it actually makes perfect sense for it to be there. Even people, I think the main reason people want to kick it out is because it's got all that weird stuff in it. But that weird stuff is also used in the book of Luke to talk about spiritual things. So we know exactly what kind of, stepping on scorpions and drinking poison and all this. That same sort of language is used in the book of Luke. So we know what's going on there.
Well, and you know what else, too? From the atheist perspective, the removal of that verse is a huge deal because they assume now. I think Matthew was written first. I mean, the church fathers agree on almost nothing.
Yeah, amen.
Yet they agree that Matthew was written first. So that to me is a big deal. And I appreciate the amen there because it's like that's it was put there in that order for a reason. Eusebius says it was written 8 years after the crucifixion, which would make it the very first book of the New Testament written. It would predate it at that point. If Eusebius is right, it would predate anything Paul wrote by a decade. And
that would be about the latest I would expect Matthew to have been written, would have been, within a decade at the most. So that I've never heard that. I never knew that Eusebius actually has. Do we call that history because he wrote it down? Yeah.
Yeah. Eusebius would be a church historian. And you know what? Unpopular belief in modern circles, but a damn good one. People like to slander Eusebius's name, but he was an excellent historian.
And by the way, channel plug, Nicholas. I have about 10 hours of audiobook I created of Eusebius's defense of the gospel and of the deity of Christ on my channel. If you're looking,
like you just reading a translation on your channel?
Yeah, of Theophania, all 5 books of it.
Nice.
Awesome. Yeah, I didn't know you were like doing stuff that would be interesting. So I'll check out your channel again.
That's really cool. But yeah, and anyways, the point is what they do is they put Mark first, and then they say Mark's last 12 verses aren't there, and then they argue, okay, so the resurrection is an added narrative from people who come later on because the original one Mark doesn't have it. And it's like you see how much doubt that creates, right? You put Mark first even though it wasn't first, and then you say that it didn't actually include the resurrection narrative because obviously the conclusion would be because the resurrection narrative wasn't there originally, right? And it's just a big way for the secular historians to try and create doubt when we know Eusebius references it, Irenaeus just outright quotes, and so does Justin Martyr, just outright quotes the last 12 verses. And same thing with the Kama Johannium. It is, and let's get back to the point. The Kama Johannium is absolutely authentic, I think. It's found amongst church fathers. It's found in a 1600-year translation in the Vulgate.
Also, the text doesn't make sense without it because it talks about the 3 are one, and then it talks about the 3 agree in the one. But if you take out verse 7, there is no the one, and verse 8 literally doesn't make sense.
Totally agree. Completely agree. Real quick. Well, not real quick, because this is going to be probably another in-depth conversation. But Alex, what do some of the Portuguese translations have to say on 1 John 5:7?
You're muted, or you're silent anyway.
Yeah, you are silent for some reason. That's weird because you weren't muted at first, but it just wasn't coming through. I think your mic might be disconnected.
You just unmuted yourself. We can hear you now. Nope, suddenly can't hear you.
Alex, try and jump out real quick and jump back in. Maybe it might just be an internet thing.
Okay, how about now?
That's perfect.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll try. You hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. So 1 John chapter 5, verse 7. So I have here the same Bible version, but one is old, and the old one says there is three in heaven that testify, Father, the Word, and the Holy Spirit, and the three are one. And on updated version says there are three that testifies or gives testimony, Holy Spirit, water, and blood, and the three are unanimously one.
So they took it out right there.
Yeah, it does sound like the older versions are, which makes sense because it was after 1885 that they started questioning 1 John 5:7.
Terrible. It's horrible. How could they?
Yeah,
It's interesting because our like the KJV says the Son rather than the Word, doesn't it? And so then it's interesting because in the book of First John, Christ is equated with the statement or the word, the logos, which is the gospel. And so it's interesting that someone made that switch somewhere along the way.
Yeah, when all the church fathers quote it too, they say the logos, and then when they also are explaining the Trinity, and they're explaining the Son, they refer to him as the Son and the Logos, and God.
I did actually just look it up though. The King James does actually say word as well.
Oh, okay. So I just don't have it memorized. Okay, well that's good. That they all agree. It's always better that way.
Well, and you know what else?
The new one doesn't agree. The second one that Alex just read.
I meant the ones that we were like really taking seriously. No, I'm being funny
amen.
about it, but
Well, and the interesting. Go ahead.
You wanna see the First Timothy?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, yeah. First Timothy chapter 3, verse 16. The old version says, without doubt, any doubt, great is the mystery of piety. God Himself manifested in flesh. And the updated version says, great is the mystery of piety. The one, so they removed the word God and say the one that was manifested in flesh.
There you go.
Interesting how it seems like in both of our languages they're following the same pattern of the newer they get, the more kind of liberal they get. Which I guess would be something we could expect, right? Human nature is the same across all cultures.
Yeah,
And what
I
I
actually
said,
never studied these verses. Never had deep it.
and then also in regard to what CJ said, also what I said about the horn having power over all nations and tongues and people. There might be a fourth thing on the list, but anyway. And
I think
so
it's kindreds.
that fits the newer translations because the beast is this thing that's rising out of the sea, right? And I think we can all spiritually see it happening. I mean, the beast is partly in the sea, partway risen out. The beast is rising out of the sea. It's pretty clear stuff, you know.
See that, and what's interesting here too, because I decided to look up what the interlinear said. And it's actually pretty interesting here because so it says, and confessedly great is the of godliness mystery. It's going to sound weird because it's obviously a interlinear. Who was revealed in the flesh?
I'll do Theos, right?
Say again.
Theos, I think is the oldest one says.
Yeah, and notice it says here. So it says Haas in this interlinear here, but I'm noticing, and I don't, I'm not proficient in Greek by any stretch, so this isn't something I would have noticed before. But Haas and Theos, in fact, let's just go ahead and look it up. So,
Well, the last two letters are the same. I don't know if that's what your point's going to be. That
yeah, it is. Like how it's
someone
basically
dropped the th somewhere because
yeah.
They were probably Aryans.
yeah,
See,
because
so, like,
Haas would be like a form of maybe witch, like he witch or something like that. Let me just look it up real quick. That's my job.
yeah, so you could see there, you can kind of even see it on your screen there. You could see how easy it would be to fudge that, right? Because you're just kind of barely altering the word. So like he and God in English don't sound like the same at all. But Haas and Theos, they sound the same, and they're even spelt similarly enough that if you wanted to fudge it, you
Oh yeah,
could.
that interlinear that has Haas. What number does it give you? That'll be the easiest way for me to look it up real quick. Because some of those words can be spelled this. Different words can be spelled the same. It's kind of complicated.
3739.
Oh, that is the word I'm on. 3739. I'm on 3779. So numbers are arbitrary, so it's easy to get them mixed up. Haas, a pronoun. So it is the pronoun which. Yeah, so then Haas itself, what grammar is that? That is the grammar he which. So instead of God, it says he which, but it's the last two letters of the word God, theos.
Yeah, so I guess according to this interlinear, it would say, confessedly great is the mystery of godliness, who was revealed in the flesh. So it would, and I guess
He which was made obvious in the flesh. Yeah, that's why I said it's he which, because there's a grammar there that it's specifically a he, as opposed to a him or a she.
Right. Well, and interestingly, even the interlinear does seem to sound a little bit more, even when it's Haas rather than Theos, it still sounds a little bit more like the old school than the modern English does. I don't know if maybe that's just a trick of the language, or maybe I'm just kind of not seeing something there, but that's another interesting thing because it seems like saying confessedly great is the mystery of godliness who was revealed in the flesh, as it says here on the screen. Seems to sound, I don't know. Maybe I'm just reading too much into that.
So, godliness means
That technically, that word means good piety, is the etymology of it. It's you as well, but good for English, good piety. So the word God doesn't appear in the etymology.
Actually, it's funny. This is the same word as Eusebius. That's funny. Eusebius, I think, is how you would say it in this verb form, but nonetheless, that's the same
So
word that
the
Eusebius
word
used.
the
That's a
word
genitive.
God is
That's a
actually
genitive
not there, right?
noun.
Not in this interlinear, no, but it is in older manuscripts. So and that's
Oh,
where the
okay,
issue. Yeah, and that's where the issue kind of arises. Is certain manuscripts say "Has," which is he who, and then others say "Theos," which is God.
okay, got it.
Yeah, and that's a. So I'd be interested to do. I've never done this before, but I would be interested to look at the different ecclesiastical texts like Peshitta and Vulgate and so on, and see what they have to say on the matter. Because that would, I think, go a long way in trying to demonstrate one position over the other. In fact, let's see first.
Yeah, because I mean, it does sound plenty good. He which was made obvious in the flesh sounds good.
Because we talk to people that don't believe in the divinity of Christ or don't believe that Christ is God, that still will believe in even his like pre-existence before creation, but yet somehow he's like between God and the universe or some like all this kind of almost Gnostic ideas, which in my opinion is probably where these omissions came from. Because again, if you're just saying Jesus, he came in flesh versus God coming in flesh, that little change means a lot to a whole lot of people.
So let's see here. Share screen.
Yeah, very good point. And what matters is which one is true, and then Jesus, Lord Jesus, he is God, whether it specifically says the word God there or not. But it does seem like it would say God was made obvious in great is the mystery of godliness. God was made obvious in the flesh, so forth and so on. And I mean, that's what my icon means, that Lord Jesus made God obvious. And so that's the center of it all. So it's it'd be a little hard to imagine it not being there. God was made obvious in the flesh.
So I have the Vulgate here. It says, let's see, et manifeste magnum es pietatis sacramentum quod manifestatum est carne justificatum est spiritu. No, it does not include Deus. Eripuret angelis. That's interesting. So I guess the Vulgate agrees with the modern translations over against the older ones.
I'm sure there's not something else used for it.
Well, it
Well, if
could
it
be.
is a genuine mistake, one way or the other, then where did the mistake come in, So what did the church hand down? Did the church hand it down to, to us with it or without it? And then that's the question, what is considered the church handing it down? Because different people handed down different things. But I'm a Textus Receptus guy, but someday I hope to test the details of that,
Yeah, absolutely. It's really, I just got to say, the convenient thing about Latin is it's so familiar because of how all of our languages take so much influence from it. That like I don't know how to speak Latin, but I can still read it really well, and I kind of know what's being said because like manifestatum and sacramentum and stuff like that. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, manifesting and sacraments and stuff like that. But anyways, usually Deus is the word they use. So I didn't see Deus there, but being that I don't speak Latin, it could be I'm missing something.
Yeah, Deus is in Portuguese too. Deus.
Yeah, so
Oh, wait, should we just look at an English translation? Or is that somehow not easy to do?
you know what? That's a fairly, let's see here. English translation of Vulgate.
I don't know if my mic's unmuted. What chapter was it again? Where are we at?
It'd be 1 Timothy 3:16. So let me see here. I did just find, you know what? That was actually relatively easy, but it only has the Old Testament. Come on.
No,
That's
it
lame.
has more Novum Testamentum, New Testamentum at the bottom, and then it folds out. I don't know why it's set up that way.
You might be on a different website than I am.
Is it like a red and yellow and white one?
Yeah, vulgate.org it says.
Yeah, it has it. Oh, you switch from Old to New Testament. It's as if it's the last book of the
Oh.
Old Testament, Novum Testamentum.
I see. Thank
Yeah,
you.
so what verse is it? Or 7, huh?
Be 1
No,
Timothy
we're talking about a different book now.
3:16. Yeah.
Okay. Before this cause have I obtained mercy, that in me first Christ Jesus might shew forth all patience for the information of them that shall believe in him unto life everlasting. Wait, that's not the right verse, is it?
No, it doesn't. That's not the right verse at all.
No, I mean,
I think.
Quad
I
is
went to
definitely
1
witch.
Timothy.
Oh, you
I
know what?
didn't go to chapter 3 yet. This website's like hard to use. It kind of looks weird. Okay, I found the chapters are at the very bottom. I found the chapters, so now let me try again. And evidently great is the mystery of godliness, which was manifested in the flesh, was justified in the spirit, appeared unto angels, hath preached unto the Gentiles, is believed in the world, is taken up in glory. Okay, so here they're referring to Lord Jesus as the mystery of godliness, making him synonymous with the gospel. And while that is doctrinally consistent,
Maybe this is why they thought that it was added, or they think it's added.
That could be.
Never mind. That's something else. Never mind. I'm getting the previous thing mixed up.
but the mystery, God was manifested in the flesh. Here, let me read it that way, even though that's not how it's translated in this one, but where did I put it? Here. Okay, so, and evidently great is the mystery of godliness. God was made obvious in the flesh. I always like to do that, sorry. And evidently great is the mystery of godliness. God was manifested in the flesh, was justified in the spirit, appeared unto angels. Well, yeah, you see, that's weird, like referring to God as being justified. And that seems like a weird way of putting it. Normally, you kind of keep certain vocabulary a certain way. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it is more likely that he's being equated with the gospel in verse 16.
I know if you go from whatever the Texas Receptus Greek used, it's theos.
Yeah, the Textus Receptus has God was manifested in the flesh, which I like. I mean, like I said, that's my icon right there. God was made obvious in the flesh, so now the light lights the world because he is now obvious. Thank you, Lord Jesus.
So I guess that would be Jerome that took that out.
Well, I think Jerome is pretty well faithful. So I don't know if he would have taken it out or if he would have translated something where it was already taken. Now this is interesting. I've never actually deeply looked into 1 Timothy 3:16, but now I'm incredibly curious. Where does it start becoming different one way or the other? Because that would be, I mean, because here's the other thing too. Because Theos and Haas are so similar, it could be an honest mistake. You know what I mean? Like you just forgot or had a little trick of the mind or something like that. I mean, those kinds of things do happen. Like we'll find manuscripts, for example, where like a phrase will show up and it sounds really similar to, like, for example, a manuscript of Exodus might say, in 7 days he made the sea, the heavens and the earth and the sea and all that in them is, right? And then you might find somebody say the same thing in Genesis, the heavens, the earth, the sea, and all that in them is, even though Genesis doesn't actually say the sea and all that in them is, because like you're so used to reading the other. It's kind of like a mind trick. There's a word for it, but I can't remember what exactly it is. So it could even be an honest mistake potentially, which would I don't know. It'd be interesting that this was the honest mistake, though, right? Because it seems like it's so doctrinally important.
I think there's a lot of Jerome commentary. I'm wondering if there's a commentary of him on.
Well, we know what the doctrine is in both cases. One, the sentence would end up speaking of Lord Jesus as the mystery of godliness and making him synonymous with the gospel and weaving that together. And that fits with the book of 1 John. But then if it says God was made obvious in the flesh, then obviously that's exactly.
Well, it wouldn't surprise me if he was like, "Yeah, this would be a good way to translate this and change it." Because are you familiar with the gourd controversy, where he decided to translate the word for vine into gourd in the book of Job, and a whole bunch of like people basically like almost like had a riot in a couple of the churches because of the way they decided to change it in their scripture.
Yeah, I actually.
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying, Kelby. It's just, it looks to me like, how would we know which way that argument favors as opposed to favoring the other way? But the point I'm making is that we know that whether it says one thing or the other, it's fitting with biblical doctrine. So it does make a doctrinal difference, but both the doctrines are true. We know that.
So.
Well, still makes me trust the KJV more.
Excuse me.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I ask a question about the other topic?
Yeah, certainly.
About the word, the issue of Acts 12, right? About Passover or Easter.
Yeah.
I didn't get the problem there. What is the problem? The word Easter versus Passover.
So the King James reads Easter in Acts 12:4, which is meant to refer to the holiday we celebrate today, Resurrection of Christ. And most translations would say Passover, which is meant to refer to the Jewish holiday of commemorating the passing over the death angel over the children at the Exodus story and the whole Exodus story in general, really. So the underlying Greek there is Pasha, and the first problem we run into is that Pasha is both the Greek word for Passover and the Greek word for Easter, right? So we have to kind of do a little bit of digging beyond just simply the word to see what is being discussed there. And actually, in a lot of different languages, in fact, probably Portuguese also, you could correct me if I'm wrong here, but the word is typically like Pascua as it is in Spanish.
The same thing is Pascua. But here's the thing. I don't see a problem here on the word Easter because looks like you use it as a synonym, right? A synonym.
Well, no, not in English. So in English, we differentiate between Passover and Easter as different holidays because obviously they are different holidays, but the words we use, are different.
But we don't have two holidays here. It's only one.
No, right. So what it is the Jewish holiday of Passover is one holiday, and then Easter, which is what Christians celebrate, is another, right? But at this time, what you have going on is that you have Jews and Christians being discussed, right? So what holiday is being discussed becomes the problem. And then for most languages in the Romance family, you have the same word for both of these holidays. But in English, we actually have two different words for these holidays. Easter refers to resurrection, and then Passover refers to only the Passover holiday. So, so this is an error that probably wouldn't actually exist
It's the Passover of the Jews, CJ. That clarification, the Passover of the Jews.
Right. Passover of the Jews in particular. That's the celebration of them leaving the Exodus and all that. Leaving during the Exodus. And
Okay,
all that.
got it. Yeah, there is a confusion. There definitely is. Well, in Portuguese and also in Spanish, we use the word Pascua to refer for Christian celebration of Jesus' resurrection.
Yeah, and I think.
And when I got here and I started learning English, and I see people using both words for the same holiday.
Yeah, and that's really in this particular example, it is kind of a uniquely English problem, only because we do have the two separate words. Like, I'd be willing to bet in most other languages translations, everybody already just kind of recognizes although you would still, I guess, have the issue of what holiday is being discussed, because it's the same word, but perhaps
Right.
people have a question of.
Well,
Yeah.
my convention is that Christian Easter I call Pascha, because I grew up with a very just totally fertility-based Easter. So I'd rather use Pascha for Easter, and then Passover for the Jewish Passover. But the word Easter means rising, which is why it's related to the east, to the sunrise, and to the spring in the Germanic languages, which is why it's related to, seasonal things because of rising. But it means rising, so it's referring to the resurrection. And so people try to say that it's like fertility based simply because it's called Easter, and that's not the case. But the Easter I grew up with only had fertility symbols and no Jesus. So I prefer Pascha for Easter and Passover for the Passover of the Jews. That's how I like to do it.
Okay.
And I can definitely understand that too. Real quickly, just because my audience is always asking about my dogs. This one right here is Rorschach. He's my boy. And he's now out of the screen. Timber, the one who's being annoying and trying to get to my food, is the girl right here. And she's a little bit more frisky. But nevertheless, now you guys have seen him.
Oh yeah, and I think the reason that the season is related to the word Easter, it's the Easter season, is the spring, is the same. Spring is because it springs up, it leaps up, things rise up, things shoot up. So I think it's rising in that sense. So, sorry, just one more detail.
I think it's more related to Catholic tradition dates.
Well, I'm just referring to the etymology of Easter itself from Germanic language.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I got it. Yeah. I got the meaning and the idea, the etymology.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think can create a lot of controversy around this issue is so many. I don't know if you guys have the same problem, but a lot of people in the United States, unfortunately, there's a lot of people who are really ill-informed on history in the United States. And one of the things that constantly crops up is this idea that Easter is somehow in reference to Ishtar, which is just totally it's almost historically absurd. But nevertheless, a lot of people will see like Acts 12:4, and they'll say, "Oh, before Easter," and they'll say, "See, this is an example of Herod celebrating this Ishtar holiday." And it's just historically untenable. But it wouldn't even be a point if the King James didn't translate it as Easter.
Well, the one thing there is that I think there could be one possibility, but this might just be like, I don't know if this is fair speculation or not, but if Ishtar somehow through a spring deity or a sunrise deity is part of how the etymology of the word rising sounds similar in the German. I don't know if that's known or not, if that's a mystery, or if it's impossible or possible, but that would be the only way. But even so, it's used because it means rising, and it's the resurrection. It's as simple as that. Just because
Okay.
it's similar to other words doesn't matter in this case.
Right. It's kind of like it's a form of the etymological fallacy. In fact, I always kind of give a fun example. El means the in Spanish. It's a letter in English, and it means God in Hebrew. But it sounds identical in all three, but that doesn't mean it's related, right? And it's just an example to try and show, just because
Yeah.
words sound similar in other languages doesn't mean that they're the same thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
an example, because it rhymes and the words are related, came up for me, but it would be vulgar and I don't even want to say it. So it's like these examples just exist, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And you know what? Sometimes many words makes confusion. For example, in the subject of creation and evolution and all that subject that Kent Hove likes to discuss and debate. For example, you have the word kind. Basically, we don't use the word kind in Portuguese. We use the word species, especie, to translate the word in the Bible. And we basically don't have the word kind.
Etymologically, a species is a different variety of something, so it's the same meaning. It's a different kind of something.
Well,
Yeah.
I could see why that would.
What?
I could see though why that would be kind of confusing because, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Alex, but Kent Hovind makes a big deal of kind versus species. But if the word in the
Exactly.
Bible
Yeah.
is a species, then yeah, it's like that's interesting.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
Well, he's making a big deal between what the Bible talks about and what the theory theorizes, but the words are actually interchangeable when you get down to it. But there's a difference between the scientific definition of a species, or talking about, when God talks about the various species from his perspective, it becomes two different definitions.
Yeah, we could just simply use the word breed, the word species and breed for the variation in the same species. In that sense, in Portuguese, we use the word race for breed.
See, and to be honest with you, this is a big part of the reason this problem would even develop is just because the scientific definition of species is so convoluted, and then other people convolute it when they try to,
Yeah,
that's an
I
interesting
agree.
thing. I've never even considered that.
Guys, was really, really nice. This conversation. I have to go to sleep.
Yeah, absolutely. God bless you, man. It was wonderful having you on here again. I always appreciate you coming on.
Yeah. Thank you all, and I hope to see you again soon. God bless you.
God bless you, brother.
Thank you.
So, Bible Talk has joined us. Shalom, and thank you for being here. Go ahead and give some thoughts that you might have, whether it be on the conversation or on the debate, whatever you'd like to say here. Definitely, floor is yours. You there, Bible Talk?
Yeah, I'm here. Good channel, good content you got here, CJ. It's really amazing, and what I like about your channel here, it's calm. The discussions are calm and stuff. There's no, you know what I mean. I don't know about the debate. What debate?
Sorry, I had some food there in my mouth. So I just had first off, thank you for the kind words. I appreciate that a lot. But
Yep.
I just had a KJV only debate with Will Kinney. Technically, this is an after show for that. But at this point, we've kind of extinguished that topic a little bit. So you can kind of,
Okay.
I mean, not really extinguished it, but nevertheless, we're not strictly.
You're thinking we've exhausted it, maybe?
Yeah, I think that's right. Extinguished would be like a fire extinguisher. Yeah, you're right. That's not true. Not true. Hang on, not true isn't even the right usage either. Come on, Jay. I can English proper, I swears. Anywho, the point is we've been discussing it for quite some time, and I think Nick is right. The word I'm looking for there is exhausted.
Yeah, but I think there was a section of it that we were still talking about. It was just in my head, and then it flew away. Because I remember I agreed a bit more with Will Kinney. We were talking about, we got into the holiday itself, but listened to how it played into the debate. So I actually thought he did on that point of Easter or Passover. He made his case very well, and then you did a good job of articulating how your case may be better. And that was the best part of the debate, where you guys both had strong arguments and a lot of agreement. So I think you guys had to admit each other's arguments were strong. Maybe at that point, that was when he said, yeah, I see that, but I just disagree. And I don't know the facts that you guys agreed on, but given the facts that you guys agreed on, I don't know, because you made the more textual case, so I'd have to inspect the text. But there's also a level in which I think what he was saying made a lot of sense. And when you guys agreed about some of the early church testimony, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, and I don't think we could expect any earlier of evidence than what we have. And so the earliness, I think, of the evidence, even though it favors you, it favors his side even more. So both sides were strong on that part of the debate. It was good.
That was a really good point. And actually, on real quickly on that note, I want to say, both of the debates were good, but this debate with Will was, I think, much better than my previous debate with Will. I think we were both a little bit less confrontational and more truth-seeking in this one than we were in the last one. And I also think focusing on just the 4 verses was helpful as well. The interesting thing about Acts 12:4, to get back to your point there, the interesting thing about Acts 12:4 is that I have a lot of agreement with Will on Acts 12:4 in a lot of ways, right? Like, so for example, I've done a whole video on Easter, Hog Sameach Easter. If any of you guys are interested, check it out. But nevertheless, I still got like 5 of those, 6 of those that I'm behind on. It's ridiculous. I need to start hitting the ground running, as they say. But anyways, and I have a large deal of agreement with him in the point of, like, it's a very old holiday. I mean, they didn't start calling it Easter until like the 800s. But I mean, it's a holiday that is definitely, Anicetus and Polycarp are people who knew the disciples. You know what I mean? Well, at least Polycarp did. Anicetus might be 3rd generation down, technically. But obviously him and Polycarp knew each other, so he's not too far removed. And they both represent what they consider to be apostolic tradition, one Pauline and one Johannine. And if nothing else, that does demonstrate that celebration of the holiday we call Easter it goes way back. we're talking at this point, that'd be in the early 100s. That'd be 1900 years ago. And it's certainly possible that the disciples themselves, in fact, in the case of John, the more I'm thinking about it, the more I think John definitely did celebrate what we would consider Easter. Whether or not the other disciples did, I guess I'm not 100% sure, but it does seem likely, given Polycarp's own claims. Polycarp's kind of fourth-hand claims through Eusebius, through Irenaeus, but nevertheless, if they are recording him correctly, and I think they probably will, or were rather, it seems likely that he might have celebrated what we today call Easter. But the major difference comes in when we actually look at the text itself.
For one moment, I want to steel man Will Kinney on that point a moment ago, because he also made the point that Passover is often referred to as the Passover of the Jews, implying that it was being specified from the Christian Passover already when those scriptures were written, which I thought was, and maybe that might be why I remember sort of siding with him if I were to agree on the facts that you guys agree on. I think that was what was the tiebreaker for me.
And that's certainly not a bad point. I think that typically the phrase "the Passover of the Jews" is limited to John, and so like Luke doesn't seem to talk that way usually, which I think might be a little bit of a reason to question whether or not we should expect that throughout the whole Bible. Because, is Scripture inspired of the Holy Spirit? Absolutely. But it is also written by human authors who have certain distinctive styles about them. And in the case of John, one of the stylistic points for him is precisely that, saying a feast of the Jews or a Passover of the Jews or something like that, right?
If it is only in John, then that would fit that John celebrated it at some point, but that it's not really evidence for what's going on in Acts. I still got to say, I use that as like a tiebreaker, but tiebreaker, schmybreaker, I mean, what really matters, it's only a tiebreaker depending on your argument directly on the text, which I guess is what you're about to get into, because if the text, you used Occam's razor, is that the one? Occam's razor. Okay, yes, so they sound so similar, but they're they both exist and they're two different things, huh?
Yeah, and go ahead.
Oh no, it's Arkham Asylum, not Arkham Razor. Okay, so Occam's razor. So and yeah, I'm not sure how strong Occam's razor is, but the fact is that if the text indicates that it reads the way that you say, then it does. So like I say, tiebreaker, schmybreaker. That's my point.
Well, and Occam's razor is incredibly strong, but only if you utilize it correctly. So a lot of people say Occam's razor is the simplest answer wins. That's not actually accurate. 1 second. Sorry, I just took a bite of some garlic bread.
Well, in this case, it might be if it's the straightforward reading of the text, such that it's what the author intended to convey. But then I'd look at it from that perspective rather than, well, because it's a more straightforward text, it's simpler, so it's Occam's razor. I would just look at it as a reading assessment, inspection, personally. But I think we're kind of on the same page there.
Right, and to be most accurate about, real quickly before I go into the text, to be most accurate about Occam's razor, what it actually says is, given the same outcome, the answer with the least amount of assumptions or moving parts is likely correct. So you need to have two positions that legitimately give you the same result, and you need to have one option have less assumptions as well as less variables, which is what you would refer to as like those moving parts, right? And if you can have one that has less variables and less assumptions, but still gives you the same answer, Occam's razor would say it is likely to be the more correct one. So just to give a humorous example that you'll find on Wikipedia, it's possible that your dog broke the vase, excuse me, and it's also possible that some little green men who come out in the spring came out and broke your vase. But one of those, even though they both get you the same result, which is a broken vase, one of them assumes only that you have a dog, and in this scenario you do, and the other one assumes.
Well, yeah,
that
hold on. In the situation, the dog's not an assumption, and that's important for what you're talking about.
Well, yeah, no, that's good call there, because that is exactly correct. And in the other scenario, you do have this assumption, namely that little green men exist and that they pop out in the spring and that they're interested in breaking your vase and these other kinds of things, right? So that's all, like I said, just a fun example, but it kind of demonstrates the point, right? It's more reasonable given the fact that you don't have to demonstrate little green men exist, and given the fact that you know the person has a dog and all these other kinds of things. So now when we go to the text using this idea, and I'll go ahead and put the text on screen here real quick. So, and we can start here with verse 3 for a little bit of context. Because he saw it pleased the Jews, he proceeded further to take Peter also. Then were the days of unleavened bread. Ooh, come on, buddy, don't do that. Sorry, my dog decided to lay on my computer. Come here, you little goof. Anyways. And because he saw it pleased the Jews, he proceeded further to take Peter also. Then were the days of unleavened bread. And when he had apprehended them, he put him in prison and delivered him to the 4 quaternions of soldiers to keep him, intending after Easter to bring him forth to the people. Obviously, I'm reading a King James here, right? Now, this word Easter is what's in question, right? That's the word Pascha. Contextually, we know here that, number one, it is the days of unleavened bread, right? That is part of the context here. Number two, Herod is acting because he saw it pleased the Jews. And number three, he was intending after Pascha, whatever it is, to bring him forth to the people, which is likely to slay him, given the context. But it doesn't directly say that, right? So you have two potential scenarios here. One says, during the days of unleavened bread, Herod, wanting to please the Jews, wanted to bring Peter forth to the people after the Passover holiday had passed, because obviously it would be profaning the Passover holiday in order to do it on the Passover holiday. The other option, which Will gave, is during the days of unleavened bread, Herod was just so happening to intend to kill him after Easter, but he wasn't actively thinking that it was going to be after Easter. It just so happened to work out that way. And it has nothing to do with whether or not it could or could not please the Jews, right? So in the scenario that's given there, I think that you have a clear Occam's razor kind of slice, so to speak, to say, all right, one of these doesn't make any assumptions about the text. It doesn't assume anything. It doesn't assume anything about, the Holy Spirit being the one who's intending to have it happen after Easter and not necessarily Herod, even though it says intention of Herod. And it doesn't say anything to say that the view of the Jews, was not in question, even though, or not something that it was being taken into consideration, even though it says directly he's doing this because it pleased the Jews, rather. And it takes into account the time of year, which is during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, or as we know it, Passover, although Passover could also refer specifically to the day of Passover, right? And so you have all these different assumptions of, well, it's not really his intention, rather it's just the Holy Spirit is writing these down, and it just so happens that it's going to be after Easter. And he's not really interested in pleasing the Jews, even though it says he saw it please the Jews. And yeah, it's the days of unleavened bread, but that turns out to not really be relevant to the story and all these other kind of things. As I just simply say, hey, look, he didn't want to profane the Passover holiday. We already know it was that holiday because it says then were the days of unleavened bread. And he wants to do it after that holiday because that would be most pleasing to the Jews, as it says in verse number 3. So even if we granted, long and short, even if we granted that Easter was celebrated by the apostles, and I'm ready to admit that it's possible it might have been, but even if we granted that, this text does not read like discussion about Easter. It seems very much more likely that he is intending to bring Peter to the people after the Passover, either day or the entire Feast of Unleavened Bread, which we already know is occurring during this time.
I'd like to look at the Greek and see what it says, because it's not meant to be a puzzle. It's meant to be read. And it might be worded in a way which favors one or the other. So, oh yeah, I think I can screen share. And I just, yeah, unfortunately, oh, I can select a window or a screen. Cool. There we go. Okay, so, as yet, according at the time, and some of this I'm trusting what it already says here that I've never looked up, and some of it I'm using my own knowledge, but I'm not just making anything up. I'm either using my own knowledge or going off what this tool is giving me. So, as yet, according at the time stretched forth Herod the king the hands to vex certain off of the church, so certain from the church. As yet, he did kill James, the brother of John, by sword, and was seeing thusly that pleased is the Jews, something like that. I'll just have to go with that it pleased the Jews, because I'm not going to take the time to look up this word that I don't know here. But, so, thusly, that it pleased the Jews. So he did it. Okay, thusly, that it pleased the Jews. He proceeded further to take also Peter, as yet were the days of unleavened bread. And him which, when he was apprehending, and him which was apprehending, did put in prison, was delivering to the soldiers to keep him, is intending with the Pascha to, so his intending with the Pascha was to bring him to the people. Yeah, so it sounds like his timing is pretty specific. It's with the Pascha. And so this with, supposedly when it's used for the accusative, it means after, but it would be like a specific timing. It's literally the word with, and so it's like immediately after. So it is a specific timing, which does favor your reading, CJ. Or did CJ think I'd still be going? Are you not at the mic, brother? Do you guys hear me? I wonder what's going on. Hey, Cheryl, it looks like you're still here.
I can hear you.
Okay. So I don't know. Oh, so CJ's internet just dropped. Well, that's too bad because I just got like just by the word study, it favors CJ's reading, and I thought I just got to tell him that, and I just thought he got to enjoy that trip with me, and he's not here. But you
The
guys,
host is gone. The host is gone.
yeah, that's okay. We can like carry it until then. But the thing is that I often have a lot to say, so when I try to give other people space when I don't have anything to say. So if you guys
I remember
would
you,
like-
Nicola. I remember you. I think you used to talk to Kevin and Graham, didn't you?
Yeah. Yeah, and the discussions weren't productive with Graham, and Kevin and I are still talking in email, but I've been doing very little YouTube. I've been focused on a couple other things. And so,
Yeah.
so Kevin and I are talking, but it hasn't been on YouTube.
Okay. Yeah.
Sorry, my dog stepped on my laptop, so I had to restart it. I'm actually surprised it kept you guys.
Sorry, I interrupted you, but earlier I didn't say it when I had the right chance to say it, because, like, what is your dog, a cat? Cats,
Seriously.
they always get on the computer to get the owner's attention.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, and it's only one of them. It's the girl, Timber. She's just got a lot of personality, always getting all up in your face and stuff like that. In fact, my boy, kind of see here, he's just kicking it. He wants to be by the person, but he's okay to be ignored. You know what I mean? But she's just like, I absolutely must be in your grill. Otherwise, I'm going to throw a fit.
So you like, seems like you missed it. I was studying it, and I came to a conclusion on my own based just on the text. Did you happen to get to hear most of that or all of that before you were lost?
Yeah, most of it, yes. So where I got cut off is you said it seems like the timing is very specific, and then that's the last thing I heard.
Yeah, so what it is that word meta there means with. But earlier today, I heard from a Greek speaker that when it's before the accusative, it is after. But at the same time, sometimes he uses conventional translating that's a little bit looser, whereas I prefer getting more literal. And I find that whenever I go more literal, I'm just like, why didn't they just do this before? It's just making sense. Like, the way God said it was a good way to say it. And that kind of relates to earlier when we were talking about Behemoth. But yeah, in this case, so it's after, but literally it's the word with. So it's not like any time after, it's like immediately after, because it's with. And so if it's immediately after, the timing is specific. And so regardless of whether it's with or after, it has to be like a specific timing of after, or at least that would be the regular way to read it. And so, yeah, your reading is definitely stronger than his. Or we're talking about the translation then. So what is it about the translation that is complained about?
So it would basically be that he would say
Oh,
the
Easter.
translation of Easter is accurate, and that Easter and unleavened bread are different holidays. And then I would
So I'm
say the
only referring
translation
to one
of
point.
Passover is accurate, and
Yeah, so if it's referring to the Christian Passover, which is Easter, that could still be a specific time. Now, but it says it's about the Jews. So, yeah, so then that favors what you're saying, right? Because it specifies, so it doesn't even favor what you're saying. It actually tells us which of the two it is. Let me double check how it's worded there, not in the Greek, but in the English. Because, it takes more time for me to carefully scrutinize the Greek. Some sections I already know very well, so it looks like But this section I don't already know well. So is it verse 7? What verse is it? Is it Acts 12:17?
12:4.
12:4, thank you. And when he had apprehended him, he put in prison and delivered to 4 quaternions of soldiers to keep him, intending after Easter. No, the part about the Jews. Now, about the time Herod the king stretched forth hands to vex certain of the church, and he killed James, the brother of John, with the sword, and because he saw it pleased the Jews, he proceeded further to take Peter also. So he took Peter because it pleased the Jews. So that doesn't really have any bearing on the argument, actually. Then were the days of unleavened bread. And when he had apprehended him, he put in prison and delivered to soldiers, intending with Easter, that is immediately after, but with Easter, to bring him forth to the people. So upon Easter arriving or passing, whichever one it's referring to, or it could be Passover.
Well, and notice now, this is why it's important that it says, seeing it pleased the Jews, because what is he doing with Peter after the Passover? He's bringing him before the people. So his intention in all of this is it's pleasing to the Jews. And we know that Herod, also being a king of the Jews, would not want to, on top of the fact that he would want to please them, he would not want to profane them by profaning their holy day. Not because he cares about Passover. He's not an adherent Jew, but because he just kind of wants to keep the peace and be popular, right? You almost think of it like Donald Trump. Donald Trump does a lot of good stuff and he does a lot of bad stuff, and almost all of it has to do with whether or not his fan base really likes it, not really what he believes. Herod's kind of a similar way, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm just trying to get just what is going on textually. And when he had apprehended him, put in prison. Oh, wait, because he's off. And when he had apprehended him, he put in prison and delivered to 4 quaternions of soldiers to keep him, intending after Pascha to bring him forth to the people. Okay, so let me take a closer look at that word. Intending would be the only word worth taking a closer look at, because, right? And that's in verse 4, 10:14. Let me see if I already have that in my database that I've already worked on. 10:14. No, I don't. So.
And by the way, just so everyone knows, since we are getting about past the 3-hour mark, we'll be starting to shut it down. We're going to finish this topic first, but I just want to give everybody fair warning. We're going to start the wind down here soon.
And I'm looking for. It's not
bounce up.
showing me 10:14 on the list of things I can share. I don't know why. Let me try one more time real quick. Share screen.
Shalom to you, Kelby. Thanks for joining us. I appreciate you.
I don't want to try this blank thing. You know? Who knows what that is? I could dox someone or anything. So, okay, well, I'm going to do it off screen, sorry. So, it says, to will, deliberately, have a purpose, be minded. Middle voice of the primary verb, to will. Okay, so it's middle voice of a primary verb. It's interesting because there's other words for will and intend, and this isn't those words. So it says to compare to 2309. Yeah, that's what I would expect usually, but that's a completely different word. Just completely different. So I'm just to will, wish, to will deliberately, have a purpose, be minded. But I'm not seeing of his own free will. Interesting. So I wish it had like one of those quick synonym comparisons. So I don't know what the semantic distinction is between this and the other word for will, and it would take some time investing in some study to get to it. So that's just too bad for right now.
Well, that's certainly all right.
Oh, but it
I think-
does look like it's a fairly active form of will, like to wish, to intend, be minded, will, he would. Here, let me just look at how it's used a few times at least. Let's see. Will, to whomsoever the Son will reveal him, Pilate willing to content the people. I think it's pretty close to desiring, because it's like, it wasn't like from his own will he wanted to content the people, Pilate. It was like, oh, maybe that is what it's saying. That's the thing. How do I know what it's saying? I have to listen, not impose. We would know, therefore, what these things mean. It looks like I don't know anything special about it. So okay, so he was, but it does look like he was intending with. Yeah. So the intending being a participle coming just before the preposition with or after specifies that the after was intended. Otherwise, I think you'd use a different word order. You know, people talk about word order not mattering as much in Greek. That's just not true. It's just used very differently than in English.
Yeah, and I think, to be honest, I think word order's got to matter in every language, at least to a limited extent.
Yeah, and especially with with prepositions. Prepositions in the Greek are definitely going to be directly with their word order, or some words might be grouped together, but they're still going to be in order for a preposition. And for people who don't know, a preposition is like up or down or left or toward. When you say where something is, that's a preposition. Against, about, from. Okay, that's a
Imagine what's ahead when you leave schizophrenia pills behind.
Well, and so to kind of reiterate, I think given the context we have here, it just seems to me to be pretty straightforward a discussion about Passover, the Jewish holiday, rather than Easter, the Christian holiday. And it almost seems to me like the other reasons you could give, it's possible that they might make even a small deal of sense, but they seem ad hoc and kind of contrived, and they make a lot of assumptions and have a lot of variables. Whereas the text seems to just be saying, if you just read it at face value, what we're talking about is Passover.
Yeah, so the Passover happens sometime during the week of unleavened bread. Is that how it works?
Well, it depends on how specific you're being with the words. Passover can refer to the whole week, or it can refer to the first day of the week, which is Nisan 14th, or Aviv 14th, depending on what you're calling the months. But they're the same month; they're just different names for the same month.
Okay, so you're thinking that it's talking about after the whole week of Passover?
No, my personal assumption, I guess, if you would, it's not an assumption, but my argument here would be, I think he is arrested, and then he is intending to. It might be after the Passover day, or excuse me, after the Passover week, but I think it's likely after the Passover day that he's intending, especially given that the way that the Jews typically celebrate, and this is even true to this day, the way that they typically celebrate these multi-day holidays like Passover and Shavuot and Hanukkah and stuff like that is the first and last days are the really big celebrations, and then those middle days they're more smaller holidays. It's almost like the first and last days are your Christmases, and the middle days are your St. Patrick's days. And what I mean by that is, like, the smaller holidays.
Wait, but when we're talking about but what I'm asking is, when is the Passover day relative to the rest of the week of unleavened bread?
At the beginning. So when you have the full week, it's a 7 or 8 day holiday. I say 7 or 8 because it kind of depends on, and this actually would, never mind, that's not relevant because that's a modern rabbinic invention. So it's a 7-day holiday. the first day would be the Passover day, and then the rest of it would be the week of unleavened bread.
Okay, so the first day is the Passover day. Then if it's already the week of unleavened bread, if it's already the days of unleavened bread, instead of just being Passover, then it's already after the Passover. So,
Or on it. It would either be before or not before, after it, or on it. So the reading
yeah, but
then
on
would seem
it,
to
wouldn't they just
suggest.
say so rather than referring to it as the days of unleavened bread? It seems like if you have a specific day, then you just say it.
Well, not necessarily, because the days of unleavened bread would be all encompassing, right? It's referencing the entire holiday. So what it seems like to me is this is the days of unleavened bread. He's been arrested on, or potentially even the day before, but probably on the Passover holiday, and then Herod is going to have him brought to the people after the day's end, so as not to profane the day. Or you could even say potentially after the week's end, so as not to profane the entire holiday. But I don't know if it's necessary to say it's the whole week. Either way, though, you would still be talking about Passover and not talking about Easter.
Yeah, and so okay, so to take also Peter, as yet were the days of unleavened bread. And I'm not going to dig deeper into the grammar of that word "were" because it actually is just the regular word for was, except that it's plural. So digging further into the grammar is not really appropriate like it usually is because it's just the normal word for was. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, because it's their normal word for it, they loosen up on the grammar with it because it's the normal one. So also, and take also Peter, as yet were the days of unleavened bread, which also, having apprehended him, which also having apprehended him, did put into prison, was delivering to 4 quaternions of soldiers to keep him, intending or willing or whatever that word is, with the Pascha to bring forth to the people. Therefore Peter was kept in the prison where he was pleasing. Okay, let's just look at it in English. How's the rest of the story going? When Herod would have brought him forth, Peter therefore was kept in prison, but prayer was made without ceasing of the church unto God for him. And when Herod would have brought him forth, the same night Peter was sleeping between 2 soldiers, bound with 2 chains, and the keepers before the door kept the prison. Okay, yeah, the way it says the same night about that night in which Peter would have been taken forth, this really does sound like the days of unleavened bread is not the Passover, because that would have been referred to as the Passover. And so I think there is a really fair case that this might be referring to the Christian Passover, if indeed it was celebrated so early. John the Apostle, in my opinion. You both have really good cases. It's not really very easy, but it does sound like it's talking about multiple days and what's going on over time to me.
Well, and the last thing I guess I would ask for a little consideration there on, which has not been brought up yet in our conversation, is what reason would Herod have to wait until after Easter being is that he probably wouldn't even know it was a thing.
Well, isn't that the last day of their unleavened bread week? So it would be the same reason you gave, but it would be according to how Will Kinney said. He's not thinking specifically, well, this is the Christian holiday, but he is thinking specifically, this is what Will Kinney missed to steelman his argument, right? Because what it really is that if it's the last day of the week of unleavened bread, which I think you can tell me if that's right, then that would be the very specific time when Herod would want to wait until. That would make a lot of sense.
Well, and so not necessarily, it could be the last day. Really, what it would be is, and it depends on the exact group. One group, the Quartodecimans, which is the Johannine tradition, would just celebrate it on the 14th of Nisan because that's the day Jesus was crucified. And then another group would celebrate it on the first Sunday of the Passover week, which could be at the end, but it also could be the very first day. It would really just kind of depend on when the Sunday landed, right? So, like, just as an example, for this year, the very first Passover day this year was April 15th, and that was a Friday. So you would only actually have your Easter holiday back then on the 17th, 2 days later. And actually, lo and behold, that was the same that it was this year. Whereas, of course, with the Quartodecimans, they would be celebrating it actually on that Friday of April 15th. But like, if you're to go to 2023, which is next year, it's going to be April 5th, and that's going to be a Wednesday. And so at that point, you're going to have a little bit longer of a time to get to Easter, which will be April 10th, because it'd be the first Sunday of the Paschal week. So it depends on who's celebrating, and it also depends on what exactly is happening with the calendar.
Yeah, another possibility, I think, is the days of unleavened bread. Well, is it a mouthful in the Greek, though? It's only a mouthful. It's a mouthful in the English, but it's only going to matter if it's a mouthful in the Greek. So let me go back and look at that. What verse number is that in? Oh, here it is. Okay. As yet, she days, or just as yet days of the unleavened. So that's not really a mouthful. So, intending with the days of the unleavened to bring him forth. I mean, that does sound terrible, though. Or, I don't know if it would sound terrible with the Hemerai tone. Yeah, I mean, I think it's Hatzamon. Hatzamon, actually, but no, I was right the first time. Anyway, neither here nor there. So, Hemera tone Hatzamon. So with Hemera tone Hatzamon, Anagagain, Aton, To, Lao. Okay, so, yeah, I think that part's still kind of a mouthful as opposed to just the Pascha. Yeah, and in fact, there's not even a the before days here. It's days of the unleavened, but without a definite article even on it. So the Pascha could be referring to the whole week, which would be more Will's timeline, but then would be your way of reading the word. But if Easter, is there a structure to the week of unleavened bread that the week always ends on a Sunday, or is that not how it works? It ends on whatever day it starts on. So
it just begins on the 14th day of Nisan, so it could end on a Sunday, it could end on a Wednesday, it's just
there's a
whatever
1 in
happens with the
7 chance
calendar.
approximately that it would end on a Sunday.
Right.
Okay, so I think there's a possibility it's the week of Pascha, but I just think the way it talks about it doesn't sound like it's talking about one night. as yet when Herod would have brought him forth that same night. It's the same night Herod would have brought him forth, which sounds quite different from being the same night that's the only night being talked about. So that's why, yeah, if I think there's a good chance it's talking about the week of Pascha, because I don't think it would say days of unleavened bread a second time right there. And so I think it might be Will Kinney's timeline. But I don't know if I have much reason to think it would make sense for it to be on Easter. You make a good point there. Um, yeah, so I agree with that point.
Well, and with that, I do think, because I actually got to get up in like 7 hours.
Yeah, I don't know if I kind of interrupted you or, got into
No,
the
you're
discussion
good.
before you had a chance to totally explain what your argument was. Obviously, I totally get it, I think. And no, yeah, you got to explain it, and I heard it out. And yeah, it's a tough one.
Yeah, and no need to have any sort of like a apology or anything there. I'm just starting to notice that it is about 1:42, and I'm gonna be going to a breakfast at about 9 o'clock. So I just want to get to bed here pretty soon. Kind of abrupt, unfortunately, but it's more my fault than anything else.
No, we went over all the topics, and I think the stream's petering out anyway. And very good. Yeah. This is we went over everything in excruciating detail, which I think is good because that's how you're really testing it, right? So there's just going over it real quick, and then there's really testing it.
Right. Yeah, and I appreciate you, and then also everybody else who was on here. I know most of them have bowed out now, so they're not actually here anymore. But nonetheless, appreciate every single one of you guys.
Let me say last words, and I'll let you close the show by yourself. So everybody, Lord Jesus is God made obvious in the flesh, whether that's the exact wording of that verse or not. The fact is true. And he made God obvious by going to the cross. And because he was willing to go to the cross, we have assurance that he is glad to pay for our sins. And so let us believe that. And the fruit of that will be everlasting life. And it will also be, whatever good works we do will only come as fruit of that. But that salvation will never come as fruit of the works. So, yeah, he makes God obvious. He is God made obvious in the flesh. Therefore, we have reason to believe the gospel. So just trust Messiah.
Absolutely. And with that, friends, I'll go ahead and say shalom to you all. I appreciate every single one of you who has joined us tonight. If you are still here, please consider liking and sharing this video. And please consider subscribing to the channel if you have not done so. Hit that bell to get notified every time that we go live. You can follow us on various social media platforms. If you look up The Synagogue, I am on Gab, Parler, Facebook, Twitter, and Minds. Certainly do appreciate anybody who decides to check us out on any of those platforms there. Obviously appreciate anybody who's sharing these videos there as well. If you want to contribute to the work we do here financially, you certainly can do that via the Patreon or via the PayPal. Links in the live chat. If you guys are interested in that, and I certainly appreciate anything there. And then lastly, I'll say, let's see. Well, no, I think that'll be everything actually. So we're done here. Appreciate you guys tremendously. And if the Lord wills and tarries, we'll be seeing you here soon.